What happens to cops who arrest other cops, VIPs, or just people who think they're above the law? I policed in a smaller town, about 20,000 people tops, for 8 years. I was a military transplant. I didn't know anyone locally when I was hired. Lots of good old boys and friends of friends that could get away with almost anything. So we had a city councilwoman who believed no parking signs on her street didn't pertain to her. One particular shift at about 2 a.m., out of sheer frustration I guess, I found her truck parked in the street and decided to wake her up and politely ask her to move it. Thank God for body cameras. Next morning at 9 a.m., I was awoken by a phone call from my superior that a formal complaint had been filed for vulgar language and intimidation by same councilwoman. Again, thank God for body cameras. My father had to arrest a retired NYPD officer for a DWI in North Carolina. It was interesting to say the least. He was a jerk. He acted like my father was disrespecting the badge by arresting another officer. Did your dad say anything about, disrespecting the law? I got hit by a drunk driver early in my career. Spent a long time in the hospital and was pensioned off. Thanks for a lifetime of pain, drunk driver. He was back on the road before I got out of traction. So yeah, I always had a thing against drunk drivers when I was a policeman. Found out pretty quick that cops make up a high percentage of offenders in the late 1970s, and I was pretty quickly ostracized after locking a few of those guys up. The local head of the police department here gave himself a ticket recently. He realized he'd parked in the loading zone. He'd just been telling his team how they had to respect laws around parking and zoning. So props to him. I really respect the guy. He also tries to encourage the state government not to increase police funding and instead spend more on social work, early intervention programs for addicts, stuff like that. He says policing is what happens when all other measures have failed. He strongly supports safe substance use rooms, needle supply and disposal programs, detox programs, stuff like that. He's changed his mind on various proposed rules around things like restricting new or probationary drivers from having high-powered cars after examination of the evidence showed that the proposed rule would be ineffective or was not justified by the statistics. We really need more people like him. Holy crap, a principled man. I reckon we're going to get a lot of very concerning stories about gross misuses of power against the few cops that try to be the exception to the ACAB rule here, so I just thought I'd chuck it in once I saw it. Seems like this guy is the standard a lot of the higher-ups in the command should hold themselves to. A friend's father was the commander of the local state police post. He lived by a railroad track that had been out of use for several decades, yet there was still a stop sign at the crossing by his house. Everybody knew this sign was obsolete and nobody stopped for it. He was pulled over by a local town police officer and issued a ticket for running the stop sign. The officer told my friend's father, "Hey, just because you're a state patrolman doesn't give you the right to run the stop sign." A couple of days later, friend's father was going to lunch in his state cruiser and the town officer speeds by him in his town cruiser. State trooper pulls him over and gives him a speeding ticket. Friend's father tells him, "Just because you're a town cop and driving a police car doesn't give you the right to speed and break the law when you're not responding to a call." Yeah, nothing scandalous or anything. It was something basic that I would typically not ticket for. I think failing to stop when entering a public road from a business or something like that. Anyway, the individual immediately pulled out some state law enforcement ID instead of his license. I had to awkwardly tell him to provide the license, insurance, registration, and he went on about his years of service in whatever state. The rest of the stop went as usual, once I could get him to provide the documentation anyway. I ran his information and served him a citation. It drives me crazy when people try to pull a law enforcement officer card. Just be cool. He must have pled guilty and paid it, though, because I had no further involvement. A police officer came into the Home Depot that I work at and tried to return a weed whacker because it didn't work. He was in uniform still. We explained that because A, he didn't have a receipt, and B, the particular model he was trying to return was pretty old, that we don't even sell it anymore and haven't for a while, and that it couldn't be returned. He basically said that he was a cop and we were committing a crime for selling him a faulty weed whacker. He then proceeded to walk over to the garden center, pick up a brand new weed whacker, and walk out the door with it. This is theft. The police were called and we all watched a police officer get arrested. Crazy stuff. A state trooper pulled the cop card when I worked at the depot. He was buying concrete. I started to load a partial pallet in the back of his half-ton truck, and he wanted me to put the full one in so he only had to make one trip. Your truck can't handle a full pallet, man. I'm a cop. Yeah, you are. So I loaded the full pallet up and watched his truck squat. Sat right down on the tires as soon as he tried to drive off. I didn't help him unload it. That logic, though. Sir, what about physics? I'm a cop. But what about gravity? I'm a cop. My pastor was the police chaplain in our town. He wrote a sheriff's deputy a ticket for parking his cruiser in a no parking zone. It was either a school zone or a fire hydrant, I think. And the guy wasn't parking for police business, so the cop couldn't argue out of it. There was a crap storm from the deputy about how he's a cop and he can't ticket cops. About 3 weeks later, my youth group has a trip to go to bowling in a city the next county over. Well, the D-bag deputy decides to pull a U-turn through the grass median and pull over my pastor with a bunch of us high schoolers in the back. Pulls our pastor out and walks him back to his cruiser to give him a ticket for speeding. To be honest, I'm not sure if the pastor was or wasn't speeding. Our pastor comes back and said he's got a speeding ticket and wonders what the deputy is doing in the next county over. And we're not talking like a stone's throw from the line. We're talking miles over the line where the cop shouldn't be. My town recently had a big stink about our local cops not being where they should be, so that the sheriff's office was doing that too riled up some folks, I can tell you. My father is a cop. He once pulled over his superior for drunk driving. His boss expected special treatment. My dad arrested him. He then ended up leaving the department because he was warned, "If you don't have our backs, then don't expect us to have yours." A kid my sister went to high school with called 911 because his dad was drunk and hitting the mum. The police didn't arrest the dad, but they took him away in the police car, calmed down the mother and made sure she wasn't seriously injured. They then turned to the kid, who was like 15 or 16 years old, and rip into him about how irresponsible he was to call 911 and that his dad would be fired from his job if he got arrested. Then went on about how they'd lose the house and his parents would probably get divorced if his dad lost his job about this. Dad was a police sergeant in the next town over that was well known to the responding officers. I worked as a tribal officer for about 25 years and issued tickets to other officers, correctional officers, and politicians. It didn't matter to me who that person was that I had arrested. I also arrested other cops and ordered my own brother to be arrested. I wasn't the primary officer on scene. The responding officer was trying to be helpful by letting me know so I could take him home. So I was a sergeant at the time and never gave breaks to officers or family members. Nothing ever happened to me. I was threatened, but nothing ever came from it. However, speaking as chief of police was different. When I was being interviewed, I told the tribal council, who did the hiring for the chief position, that I don't play politics. I did my job and got things done. 14 months later, I was told that the tribal council was talking about me, and by the time I got there, I was removed. My appeals process was never followed either. My old criminal justice teacher, who used to be a cop, once told us a story about how he got pulled over by a cop from a different city, but still the same county. He tried telling him he was a cop and showed his badge, but the cop wasn't having it. He got so annoyed that he got out of his car and walked up to the cop writing the ticket and started mouthing off to him, which definitely didn't help. The next couple of months, my teacher's city and the other cop's city got into a ticket war, and they'd write each other tickets if they saw that they were a cop from the other city. So basically, they got into a police ticket war. While on the one hand, it's actually great to see cops holding each other accountable, on the other hand, this is a lot of public resources being misused over a petty squabble. Pretty irritating that this is what all their time and energy was going into. Next up, another example of this grossness. My dad, 29 years CHP, once pulled over a dispatcher for something like expired registration. They tried to worm out of it along the lines of professional courtesy, but Dad wasn't having it and issued the citation. Not long after, my mum got pulled over for speeding at less than 5 over, and here's the officer on the radio confirming her identity. There's a price for principle, which is a shame. The only time I think I've ever pulled over or encountered another law enforcement officer is traffic accident related. An accident I witnessed myself while investigating another accident. Roads were icy and we had about 5 accidents, one after the other. I watched this deputy cause the accident, mostly due to his bald tires. I cited him. I also got called into a neighboring city to investigate a traffic accident where the cop was at fault. Had to cite him as well. That being said, I've been cited by other cops. Recently, I was driving to Vegas and a state trooper got me. I had a firearm in the console next to me and I notified him. Let him know it was right there in view and that I was a cop. He cited me for the full amount over just because I was a cop and should have known better. No argument there. One of our officers got arrested for DUI last year by our neighboring agency, got arrested on a Friday, and quit the following Tuesday. Also got called onto the highway to investigate an accident involving a trooper in her patrol vehicle. She'd rear-ended the person in front of her. Watched the dash camera in her car, traffic began to slow, everyone started to skid due to black ice, and she bumped the vehicle in front of her. I didn't cite her, but did list her as at fault on the state accident form. I have absolutely written tickets to other cops for several reasons. First, they know better. 2, it's hypocritical. They're doing something they'd write tickets for in their home jurisdiction. And 3, it's disrespectful when they flash their badges or something. They know they're asking me to make an ethical compromise. Now, if they're doing something that I would 50-50 give a warning for to an average person, they're vastly more likely to get a warning. Think 8 to 9 over the limit or a cell phone. And it's the same for dismissible offenses, like no driver's license on their possession, something that would get dismissed by the court for anyone by law normally. But if it's something that I'd 100% write a ticket for, they're not going to get a warning instead. Some cops are very respectful and will only say something after the stop is over and done with. Some you can tell just because they act slightly out of the ordinary, like they'll address you properly, as trooper, deputy, officer, or put their hands on the wheel, roll all the windows down, stuff like that. Some people try to mention it on the sly, like, "I've got my off-duty weapon with me," being the favorite. Others will literally hang their badge out the window as they come to a stop. I mean, really? This also happens with the military. They'll casually hand their military ID over with their driver's license. Anyway, that's about it. You can tell that some get a bit salty when they realize they're getting a ticket anyway, but none of them have argued to me so far because there's absolutely nothing for them to stand on. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My sister's a cop. She'd give anyone a ticket if they were doing something stupid. She told me she gave a cop from a neighboring town a speeding ticket. He said, "What about professional courtesy?" She said, "That's what I was thinking. Professional courtesy would be not driving 65 in a 35 zone in the town where I work." We have a street racing law in Ontario, Canada, that if you're going 50 kilometers an hour over the limit, that they can tow and impound your car without due process. Makes sense with a 40k limit, but less sense at the 100k limit on the highways. I mean, at that point, you're speeding, not racing, as traffic usually moves at 120 to 130 normally. Anyway, cops running a speed trap on the highway snagged an on-duty officer in an unmarked car from a different detachment. They charged her, impounded the car, and then unleashed a crap storm. I was issued a citation once. Coming home from vacation, 10-hour drive, I'd been obeying all the traffic laws, but when we hit my state and then my county, I felt safe and stepped on it. Got lit up with blue lights almost 2 minutes later. I immediately noticed a second officer staying back by the vehicle since it's customary for officers in my area to have their own unit. I figured this guy was a trainee. He identified himself, his agency, and reason for stop. I produced my driver's license, insurance, and registration and politely informed him that I had a weapon in the vehicle. He asked if I had a concealed license, and I said no. That should have led him to ask why I was carrying, and at that point I would have informed him I was an off-duty deputy sheriff. He didn't ask and just said, "Okay," and walked off. 10 minutes later he comes back with a citation. Asked me for my phone number, to write in the citation, and name of my employer. So I said something county sheriff's office, I'm county 45. At this point he asked me why I didn't tell him I was a cop. I told him that it wasn't something I was allowed to do off the bat like that, and I wasn't playing that card. Took my citation and drove off. Got a call not 2 minutes later from his FTO apologizing and asked me to pull over and wait on him. He voided the citation and apologized. There was nothing for him to apologize for, but I did tell him he needed to address the whole "I have a weapon" thing with his rookie. My grandmother was a police officer some time ago, and while not another officer, she ended up arresting a local government official. He'd been drunk driving and crashed his car into multiple other parked cars, streetlights, and finally a building, doing ridiculous amounts of damage, but he was able to walk away and right to jail. After she booked him, in 4-inch heels, I might add, her superiors freaked the F out and demanded she release him because of who he was. If I recall correctly, she told them that they'd have to do it themselves. Pretty sure all the charges were wiped and he went home that night. She quit shortly after the incident. Before that, she was in the Navy. After law enforcement, she became a trauma nurse, and now she's very happily retired. Huh. Yuck. Look, there should be a certain egregious level of crime that nobody's immune to, and causing several tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage should be included in that list. Cops are meant to protect society from dangers like this inebriated maniac, and he should have been beholden to the same laws that would apply to a poorer person who slightly dinged someone's vehicle. Gross. My wife is a trooper. She was driving to work one morning with the cruiser as she was double-backing shifts. On the highway, a car comes flying up behind her and then decides to pass her and a bunch of other cars at a high enough speed that she decides to pull them over. Never pass the highway pace car, kids. Guy pulls over, she does all the normal cop stuff and then gets out and starts walking up. She notices the guy hanging something out the window at her, walks closer, and sees it's a badge. She acknowledged the guy, asked for license, registration, insurance, and he keeps pointing the badge at her. She asks again for his info. He shows her the badge harder, which just annoyed her more. She acknowledges the badge, asks again for his info. He finally relented and gave it over. She wrote him a ticket. He goes to work to his tiny local station and complains to his boss about the witch trooper who had pulled him over and gave him attitude. His boss calls her boss sends his boss the recording of the stop. He's no longer an officer now and is now a security guard at a hospital. I have a feeling his boss was looking for any reason to get rid of him. I did have this encounter with a cop that ended with him being arrested. I was living in a fairly weapon-friendly state, Pennsylvania. Carry permits were not required for a sidearm unless you were carrying one concealed, including transporting one in the cabin of your car. I had one for work. My background was as an insurance adjuster. I found myself, for a time, doing insurance fraud investigation for a private investigator. After an incredibly overzealous neighbor decided to assert dominance over the parking spot in front of his house by smashing my windshield with a baseball bat, I was in the car and I was watching someone a block away that had nothing to do with this clown. It was decided that I'd be carrying from then on. After a very long day of surveillance that started at 4 a.m., I stopped by the gas station at the end of my block to fill up the tank and get some snacks before tucking in for the night. I had a rare full weekend off and I was itching to get home. As I was paying, I must have shifted my coat to where the guy behind in line saw that I had my piece holstered on my hip. He interrupts my transaction to demand to know if I have a carry permit. I tell the stranger to mind his own business and I continue paying. Concerned stranger pulls out a badge and tells me that he's a municipal officer of a small town about 10 miles away. He again demands my permit and ID. I observe that we're not in said small town 10 miles away, and therefore, here in a larger town beneath our feet, he's just a regular citizen. He informs me that I'm not to leave as I'm being detained. He's calling the city police and I'm in deep doo-doo. His words for resisting. I just want to get my beef jerky, chips, and Mountain Dew home. But okay, apparently we're doing this. City police arrived within about 10 minutes. They separate us. The city cop asks me about the weapon. Do you have a permit? Yep, here it is. I'm also an insurance adjuster and I just got off work. I hand him the permit, my employer's ID card, and the badge issued by the county in that state. The cop is super chill. He goes back to his car, comes back a few minutes later, and hands me everything. He thanks me for not being a jerk. All the while, Barney Fife is being a complete moron and is making demands of the city cops. This guy basically wanted me charged with everything shy of murder, and they weren't complying because, well, I hadn't broken any laws. Apparently, when he wouldn't show some stranger his ID didn't work, he decided to back up his game by telling the cop that I looked like I was about to rob the store and was just going for my weapon when he stopped me. Now, this was a special kind of stupid move for a few reasons. Not the least of which being that there were witnesses to him being a butthole and it was a convenience store with surveillance cameras. It didn't rise to that level, however, as a quick conversation with the clerk indicated he was full of crap. So I was about to head out when one of them says to him, I wasn't aware that Town X had its own police department. When did you start there? Well, I'm actually the town constable, but if you read the state constitution, that allows me to serve as the chief law enforcement officer of the town where I'm elected. All kinds of nope. Cop cuts him off and tells him to put his hands behind his back. To my dying days, I think my happiest memory may be recalling the look of confused horror on his face when he realized that these cops weren't going to comply with his little arrest fantasy and that he was going to jail. Constables are elected, and they do have peace officer status, but they also seem to have a serious issue with overstepping their authority in that particular state. Okay, so this wasn't a cop, but I will say as someone intimately familiar with these people who get drunk off their tiny amounts of power that this is hilariously satisfying. What a moron. Prepared to lie about an innocent man to get to take part in an arrest as well. Get bent. I ticketed an air marshal one time, not a police officer, but still within law enforcement. He was going 65 in a 35 zone. He was about to hit a 25 zone right by our elementary school and showed no signs of slowing down. I happened to be driving out to take a report and saw him flying into town and flipped on the radar. I was no longer working traffic at the time, but that was way too fast heading into town, so I flipped around and pulled him over. As I approached his convertible, the music was blaring and he did not bother to turn it down. When I instructed him to do so, he flashed his ID as if that explained everything. He seemed shocked that I insisted he turn his music down and requested his driver's license and registration. He explained, while still holding up his ID, that he was a federal air marshal and didn't have time to chit-chat. I smiled and informed him he should have thought about that before he went flying through town at 65. I added that he could speed the process up by providing me with the documentation I requested. After some grumping, he finally produced said information. I wrote him a ticket. The attitude cost him any chance of me taking it easy on him. If he was shocked when I made him give me his license and insurance, he was doubly shocked when I produced the ticket and told him his court date. Generally speaking, I hate giving traffic citations, but sometimes it can be enjoyable. I had a message waiting for me in a few hours when I swung back to fill out some paperwork. His supervisor had called and wanted to give me a chance to explain myself before he called the assistant chief to report my behavior. I offered to bring the chief, who was in the office that evening, onto the phone for him so he could discuss. He declined. After he dropped the huff and puff, we discussed the citation. I walked him through the traffic stop and the behavior of his subordinate. He apologized for wasting my time. He let slip this individual was a bit of a hothead, so the behavior was not really surprising, though it was unacceptable. The air marshal called back the next day and apologized for his behavior in a voicemail. Then he showed up in court a month later to fight the citation. I mentioned to the city attorney that I still had his voicemail apology, which included him admitting he was driving way too fast. The city attorney passed that information along, he paid the ticket, and we all went about the rest of our lives. What is something you or someone you saw did just to watch the world burn? I'm a high school science teacher. At least once a year we'll start a rumor about one of us getting arrested for something. A coworker of mine told some students that I dressed up as Selena Gomez for Halloween once. It's been over a year and I still get kids that like to yell, "Hi, Selena!" I also toot while walking by students who I don't like for whatever reason. Crop dusting crappy students is one of my favorite parts of being a teacher. For a while, I had a townhouse where I had a bathroom window that overlooked the parking lot. Sometimes I would sit there with my key fob and hit the lock button so that the horn on my car would honk right when people walked by, just to watch them jump. In the early 90s, universal remote controls were new. I had a grudge against a local AV store, so I got one of the programmable remotes, and in the middle of the night I turned on everything in the store through the window and upped all the volumes to max. Once a week for months on end. Oh, I had a buddy that did this in high school. Whenever the teacher would attempt to show a movie in class, he'd use the universal remote to turn the TV off just as the teacher sat down. She was convinced the TV was haunted. You can buy a code-free universal remote that fits on your keyring. I had one and it was pretty handy at bars. My friend's girlfriend was complaining on Facebook about vomiting and feeling nauseous. I made a joke teasing her about morning sickness and congratulating her on the baby. The next hour had her wall blowing up with family and friends who took it seriously, congratulating her. Needless to say, I got a good laugh. This is a very bold move, and I'm sick because I kind of love how messed up it is. I wonder if her parents were friends with her on Facebook. A reply to this follows. Dude, this Christmas I had most of my family over for dinner, and out of nowhere, Cousin A went up to Cousin B, touched her belly and said, "How's the baby going?" jokingly. Cousin B froze, and it turns out she really was pregnant and planning on announcing it that night. Take a piece of paper and spread a thin layer of corn flour on the paper. Slide the piece of paper under a door and use a can of compressed air to blow the corn flour off the paper and onto everything on the other side of the door. The person who enters the room will find a thin layer of the powder coating quite a bit of the room. When they go to clean it up, they will inevitably use a damp cloth, and that is when the magic occurs. If you've ever played with corn flour and water, you know it becomes a non-Newtonian fluid, and these properties make it a nightmare to clean up. When you apply pressure, it's this stubborn, gloopy solid mess on the wall, but when you release the pressure, it starts to freely run down the wall like a liquid. Every Christmas, I take an ugly ornament off our tree and put it on someone else's, usually during a party or something. I have yet to be caught. One time I did something to watch the world burn and it completely backfired in my face. It was the worst prank in the history of my life. I was a dumb child. I got superglue and I went around my house gluing down things that I thought people would rarely use. Top shelf picture frame, old scarf in my mum's bottom drawer, dictionary on the bookshelf, etc. About 20 things in total. I thought that people would come across these things over the course of months.
that they would become confused and not understand how it kept happening. It was going to be my secret glory. My mum came across every single item in the course of a day. She cleans the house a lot more often than I anticipated. It was bad. Real bad. Most of the guys on the team I work with are quite overweight and have different opinions on weight loss. They also love being right. It's pretty simple to say, does, insert food here, make you, insert random weight or loss gain symptom, here? And then wait for the argument to explode, and put my headphones back on whilst they argue. I work in a pizza shop. Every time someone orders 10 wings, I always put in 11, just hoping that whoever ordered those wings plans on splitting them evenly. And I've just started a war within the household over who gets that last wing. If I ordered chicken wings and got an extra one free, I would just think the guy who made them was being nice for no reason other than that he's a nice guy. I go onto random YouTube videos and write the word fake when it clearly isn't and just watch the crap storm that develops. I stole an entire place setting from the old spaghetti factory one piece at a time. A salad plate, dinner plate, bowl, glass, spoon, fork, knife, and even a bread knife. It took months. Then one day I went there for dinner with everything in a messenger bag, right before I left it set up on the table. Whenever I visit a friend or a relative's place, I turn the magnets on their fridge upside down. Never been caught. I have, however, heard complaints of, someone keeps turning my gosh darn magnets upside down, once or twice. Lived in a neighborhood called Caroline Pines. One night we switched the E and the I on the sign to make Caroline, word for male anatomy. Stayed like that for 4 days. My buddy used to live in a neighborhood called Bantam Woods, and we got hammered one night and changed it to Batman Woods. Should have changed it to Batman's Wood. In junior year of high school, my class was given a 200-question test to do in an hour and a half. Some kid convinced everyone to white out the corner of the Scantron, so the professor had to mark every single answer by hand in a class of 30. He had to do it, and the average was 84. Something like this happened at my school, and the teacher failed every test. In 4th grade, I created a club called the Safety Patrol Busters. I'm not sure how common safety patrol kids are, or if it's still done, but they were the kids who volunteered to make sure other kids weren't doing anything unsafe, like running. If they caught you running, they'd yell at you to stop and go back and walk. During recess, me and the other boys in the club would seek out the safety patrol kids in their orange vests and run as fast as we could past them. When they yelled stop, we'd keep running. This would usually cause them to give chase. We had this secret hiding spot underneath the portable classroom buildings, trailers, where we'd hide out and watch them try to find us. They never caught the safety patrol busters, ever. I don't mean to be that kind of jerk, but when I was 17, I decided to go and buy some groceries at a Giant store or some equivalent. As I walked around, I saw some very strict-looking mums, and I had the brilliant idea of putting some random unhealthy food in their shopping carts, unnoticed, and let the kids take the blame. I thought I'd see what the mums would do. These mums, I could hear them from 2 aisles away, screaming at their children as they all denied putting the 6-pack of chocolate pudding, or 2 packs of Mountain Dew, or 4 boxes of Lucky Charms in the shopping cart. Senior year of high school, I taught 3 kids how to use any phone on campus to page over the loudspeakers. That was a hilarious week. To those curious, my school had an odd PA setup that could be used via punching in the correct extension from one of the school phones. I don't know why it was set up this way. The teachers didn't use it, probably weren't allowed, and the morning announcements were always done from the office where the actual PA mic was. Obviously, they've since changed this. I would pay actual money to hear the announcements. I know that, being kids, there was a high likelihood that it was just tooting noises and words for anatomy, but they can also be very creative in ways that we can't. I know that when I've worked with kids, they've nearly killed me laughing several times. I work at Disney World, that's the one in Florida. I found a list of the phone numbers to all the rides at Disneyland, California. I used to dial the Dumbo ride in Florida, and then before they answered, conference to the Dumbo ride in California. Both would answer, Dumbo, this is so-and-so, and I'd just sit on mute, listening to them trying to figure out who the real so-and-so working at Dumbo was. No one ever said, wait, are you in Florida or California? Put Skittles and M&Ms in the same bowl. They are appropriate snacks at some parties, as you now have S&Ms. My daughter has amazing hand-eye coordination and can throw with scary accuracy. We're a family that loses our crap when people in movie theaters talk or text or make noise. Some guy a few rows ahead kept pulling out his phone to check Facebook during the movie. I dared my daughter to throw a milk dud at his phone, and she hit it each time he pulled it out. Finally, he stopped. Then he put his feet up on the seat ahead of him where another person was sitting, so she started pelting his foot. Eventually, he sat like a perfect gentleman with nary a movement or phone check. This doesn't sound like watching the world burn, but rather keeping the world from burning. Good story, though. I jaywalked yesterday while a parking cop watched. I made eye contact. I built a dummy when I was 10 or so. My friends and I would stand in the front yard with it, wait until a car came by, and then beat the crap out of it. We'd tear his head off or put him in a hangman's noose and throw him in the street. He was about our size too, so people usually thought we were beating up another kid. They'd slam on the brakes or get out of the car to chew us out. One time we attached his hands to the second-story windowsill so it looked like he was hanging on for dear life, and some lady called 911. That was the end of that. We had an empty block of land next door to our house when I was a teenager, with a tall fence across the front. I used to drag our trampoline over to the fence, climb onto the neighbor's adjoining brick fence and wait for someone to walk past before yelling, "Swan dive!" and doing one onto the trampoline. From their perspective, it looked like I was doing a belly flop onto solid ground, and I never failed to get a reaction. In middle school, we would have a bathroom break right after lunch every day. When we went to do our business, a kid in my class started laughing maniacally while peeing in one of the urinals and proceeded to aim his pee into the corner of the bathroom. He kept laughing as his pee covered the floor, and for some freaking reason, 3 other kids started doing the same thing. By the time they were done, there was a pool covering about a third of the floor space. That would have been bad enough, but then 4 of them started to jump around and splash people. Fricking kids. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked as a camp counselor for a long time, and when I was supervising a big area alone, I'd bring all of my water guns. I hate participating in water fights, but I love watching them. My favorite thing to do is to give a water gun to one kid and encourage them to be as obnoxious as possible, watching while everyone else in the area grows to slowly hate them. Then I'll start passing them out to the other obnoxious kids and build my own little squad of terror. But the real fun comes when I engineer their demise by slowly arming a resistance against them. Brother begins turning on brother, and I watch like Caligula atop my tall rock, dry and sipping bug juice. The goal is to have a full-on war breakout by the time someone else is supposed to take over for me. In my 8th grade English class, we occasionally critiqued each other's assignments by leaving a comment on the back and then passing it to the person next to us, until everyone had reviewed each paper. One day, I decided to write "I heart Brandon," I'm Brandon, on every single paper. Eventually, my teacher noticed and got really upset that someone wasn't taking the task seriously. She instantly accused my girlfriend, who happened to be in the class and was always doodling girly stuff on her binder instead of paying attention. My girlfriend, full of adolescent emotions, erupted into tears while proclaiming her innocence. After a moment, my girlfriend's tears of embarrassment turned into tears of rage when she realized that if she hadn't written the message, another girl probably had. She got up out of her chair and started yelling and pointing at another girl, accusing her of trying to break us up. The other girl denied doing it and then started firing vulgar insults right back at my girlfriend. At this point, everyone in the class was yelling and cheering on the verbal slugfest, until eventually my teacher got everyone under control. Needless to say, I could have stopped the ordeal at any moment. I still smile just thinking about it. I worked as a wilderness guide this summer. Among my duties was packing food for the kids, ages 14 through 18, whom I would bring into the wilderness for 5 to 10 days. Every meal, chewy granola bars were involved. I would always pack 11, for 12 kids, of the same flavor, usually s'mores, and then one wild card. The kids would get so sick of the s'mores by day 2 or 3, and it was the funniest thing in the world to watch them fight over the special flavor. Real Lord of the Flies stuff. There are 2 break rooms on my floor at work, and each of them has a few cupboards full of dishes and coffee cups. Each break room pretty much is the same distance from my cubicle. Each day I make a cup of tea in one break room, and when done, I put it in the other's dishwasher. I roped in a coworker who sits next to me to do this as well. It was only a matter of a few weeks before people were complaining about how one break room had way too many coffee cups and the other one always had none. Near the end of the school year, I found a stash of permanent markers in the staff room of the elementary school in which I taught. This school required all students to remove outdoor footwear and place them on shelves near the exits. On the last day of school, I put a gift marker in each shoe. After school, I relaxed on the playground and watched. At any instant, I could see all of the stages of the prank play out. The surprised discovery, the opening and testing of the pen, the tentative line drawn down the stair rail, and the expanding cloud of graffiti spreading out from each doorway. I have two really crappy roommates. They won't clean, they use my crap all the time, play music and video games really loud until 4 a.m. sometimes. Anyway, I like to mess with them a lot by doing little things to annoy them. For instance, one of them is really short and I'm 6'4", so sometimes I put stuff that he uses a lot on really high shelves or places where he can't see them. One of them is constantly playing my Xbox on my TV, even when I want to play, so one time before I went out of town for the weekend, I put clear tape over the CD drive so it wouldn't open, and it actually just looked really like the Xbox broke. So that was fun. When I came back, it magically worked perfectly. Just little things to annoy them until I can get the frick out of there. I had a big tub full of jelly beans when I was a kid, and my cousin dumped in a bag of those Harry Potter ones with flavors like grass and booger. There weren't a lot of them, but there were enough that every once in a while you would unexpectedly gag. I don't know if any of our listeners are old enough to remember these, but the Bertie Bott's every flavor beans were absolutely disgusting. If you did this in a communal bowl of jelly beans rather than one's relatives, you would raise hell. I hold the doors open for people who are more than 7 feet away just to watch them do that stupid half jog. I really enjoy it when they thank me through gritted teeth and labored breath. I love when people do this. I intentionally walk slower just to be that guy. I've had people give up and just let go of the door and walk away. This doesn't work for me. I love making situations awkward, so I will stand there with an awkward smile on my face. I might even do an awkward half wave and call you Jeff. One day, while living in a house with 4 other roommates, a hat blew into our yard and landed on the back step, which was the main entrance. It was upright on the bottom step, like someone had placed it there. All of us thought it was weird and moved on with our lives. That same week, I went to the thrift store and bought all the weirdest cheap hats I could find. Each Tuesday, I would place an increasingly weirder hat on the back porch on my way to class. Our landlord's conspiracy theories ranged from the Mad Hatter to homeless people to one of our friends leaving the hats. I kept this up until we had a collection of 30-plus hats in our closet. They didn't believe that it was me when I told them. Fake items boxes or bananas on the ramp for the shortcut in Cooper Trooper Beach. That is just messed up. Singapore is a weird place. It's an especially weird place for an American teen. An even weirder time when our classmate was arrested at our school and was caned. Well, Singaporeans tend to be reserved and not very outgoing. We Americans were generally more outgoing, and sometimes we used to make Singaporeans uncomfortable. For example, the bus stop was about half a mile from my house. On the way, we'd walked by a big house with a few guards. My friend was with me and told me the Prime Minister lived there. Again, really small country. So we walked up to the guards and started to shake their hands and just started talking to them. They were so flustered and confused, because no one has ever done that. We weren't threatening anyone, it was just us two and we were really friendly. It was the middle of the day and we were just 16 and posed no threat. It's a normal neighborhood after all, and we had backpacks on and school uniforms. After about 3 minutes, they were extremely nervous, because they weren't trained for this. Seeing a trained guard meant to handle threats, not having any idea what to do with people being friendly to him, was unbelievably hilarious to us. We had our fun and we left. I invited both the conservatives and the liberal groups at my university to the same pub during the 2012 US presidential elections. Fisticuffs were had. When I worked at the school cafeteria, I learned my fellow college students treated cafe workers like crap. So since it was my job to keep the salad bar stocked, I never ever put the low-fat options out. It's like the dumbest act of passive aggression I ever did, but I really hoped some of those buttholes got big. I used to white out the page numbers in my school textbooks, usually in large groups of 20 or 30 pages. I always choose the middle urinal. My friend has a wife that has a bit of a jealous streak. One day, while I was hanging out at his place, we were arguing about something and he made a pretty personal insult. So I turned to his wife and say, "Hey, did he ever tell you about Rebecca?" He shot up off the couch with a look on his face that I can only describe as a combination of fear, anger, and a desire to murder me, and started yelling, "He's a freaking liar! Don't believe a word he says!" The guy was being a royal prick to me and everyone around him, just a loud D-bag. It was at a local resale store, and I was holding this old 90s VHS video recorder, and when he saw it, he went apecrap over wanting it so bad. He even tried to take it out of my hands at one point, which almost got his butt kicked 6 ways to Sunday. Well, I didn't even really want it, but I paid $20 for it. This guy wanted it so badly he followed me outside and offered something like $40 for it, and that I would be stupid not to take it. I didn't say a gosh darn word. I stared his butt down for about 5 seconds before walking to the dumpster by the side of the building. Just with all of my force and all of my might, I spiked that fricking VHS down into the empty metal dumpster. It hit with such force, lots of little plastic and metal bits came flying up, and that recorder was effed. The look on his face made it so worth it. I started laughing hysterically all the way to my car, and as I was driving away, he was still just open-mouthed and staring at me. I lost my voice the next day from laughing for so long and so hard. The KLF, an extremely successful British acid house duo, ended up with about £1 million on their hands. What did they do? They took it to an island off Scotland and burned it. I think the most normal thing one can do to ensure the world burns is deny climate change. In high school, we went around late at night during an election and swapped people's lawn signs with one from the other party. I'm a line cook at a restaurant, and just a few months after starting there, we went through some major management changes. The proprietor had just quit and the head chef fired under questionable circumstances. A lot of the staff seemed pretty loyal to them and felt more like family. The days and weeks that followed were filled with hot tempers and a lot of women crying. One morning, a new lady chef was making herself a cup of coffee and commented that it tasted funny, concluding she hadn't rinsed the pot out well enough. Nobody thinks anything of it, and we continue about our workday. I'm working the next morning, and one of the prep cooks noticed that something he's cooking tasted funny, and I remembered about the coffee from the morning before. After an investigation, he concludes that someone had mixed powdered laundry soap in the big bin of sugar. Thousands and thousands of dollars of food were thrown out that morning. Everything made in the past few days with sugar. Nobody knows if and how many customers were served tainted food, but authorities were notified, and ultimately no cases of illness came up. It's a pretty unanimous opinion that a prep cook who had quit a few days before was the culprit, but to my knowledge, no charges have been filed. What are your worst college roommate horror stories? When I was a freshman, my roommate basically had his girlfriend, whose own room was on our floor, move into our small dorm. They were banging all the time for 4 solid months. I'm waking up, they're screwing. Go to sleep, screwing. Get back from class, they're screwing. It was completely out of hand. It was every day at least 5 times for months. There were empty bulk protection boxes everywhere on his side. I basically couldn't be in my room. One day, I just wanted to come home from a long day, sit down and play Mortal Kombat with my friends in my room. But you guessed it, my room was locked. I went to our lounge, dejected, and told my friends, I really just want to walk in there, sit down and play just to spite them. One friend looked up at me and said, "Why don't you?" I was shocked. Then I nodded and said, "Yeah, why don't I? Let's go, boys." So without even knocking, 12 people followed me as I unlocked the door, walked in, refused to acknowledge them, turned on my Xbox, and we played for hours. They just sat there for a while dumbfounded. That's the same week I changed rooms. Next one wasn't too much better, but at least I could be in it. My roommate kidnapped 2 guys and held them for ransom. One hostage was set free weeks later, while the other wasn't so lucky. The body was eventually found in a basement, buried in the ground. I rented a room in an apartment there. He lived in it before I moved in. So the cops busted in and apprehended my roommate while he was sleeping. Tried for kidnapping and manslaughter along with a few of his other associates. This was in Ontario, Canada, around 2011-2012. I never really followed the story until after I moved the heck out, and then I learned that they were all in jail. My roommate was Sahib Malik. He seemed like a normal, nice guy. Student at the local university. Had no problems with him, aside from him using my kitchen knife without permission. My cousin is an international college student who had just moved here and barely spoke any English. He moved in with another roommate to offset the ridiculous cost of a New York apartment. His roommate met a pretty cute girl. However, he discussed it with my cousin and agreed that there was something odd about the girl. He didn't want to fully commit to a relationship just yet, but they still hooked up. My cousin also said that his roommate still talked to other girls but didn't move further than that. One day, my cousin and his roommate were having breakfast in the kitchen. The girl had slept over the night before. The girl wakes up and goes into the kitchen and picks up a knife and then stabs the roommate in the neck 3 times. My cousin freezes in shock but then picks up his chair and tried to fend her away. She then takes the knife and stabs herself in the chest. Everyone survives. My cousin cried and called my dad, telling him he hates America and wants to go back to China. Well, that went a million times further than I think any of us could have predicted. As a non-American, I can neither confirm nor deny whether insane crimes of passion are a regular thing in the student dorms there. She got mad when I moved her clothes to the dryer after they'd been sitting in the washer for a day and a half. I just set their wet clothes on top of the dryer if they didn't move them in a timely manner. If they complained, I'd just tell them I didn't know what in their wash was dryer safe. Besides, it was likely when my wash was done, their clothes would still be in the dryer anyways. I'm in college and my roommate currently likes to crank it and leave his used splooge tissues all over the floor. I've told him to clean up after himself a million times. No flushing or throwing them away. It grosses me out so bad, and I never bring my girlfriend to the house because of it. Buy some tongs. The next time you see one, put it in a random place. Shove one in his shoe. Put some in his backpack, in the pockets of his jeans or sweaters, in between his bedsheets. Get creative, man. The B-word didn't pay rent for 3 months, and we didn't know until after our lease was up. Was just resolved 6 months ago, and I graduated 2 years ago. I will never sign a joint lease again. I had a roommate that would mix booze and pills. One night, she fell asleep with her adult fun toy doing its thing. She woke up when the batteries ran out. At least she had some fun dreams. I've never resided in a college dorm, but I just wanted to share that once I was in a Skype call with my good friend who does reside in a dorm, who left his mic on when he left for an extended period of time, allowing me and the other 2 people in our call to hear all his roommates, like 5 other guys, arguing about who ate the last Pop-Tart. It got pretty intense. Is this what dorm life is like? Freshman year college had bunk beds. Drunk roommate comes home before me. He sleeps on top. He drank too much, and he wet the bed. Like an open fire hydrant, apparently. I came home later and sat down in a flash flood puddle in my completely soaked mattress. Here's how it went. I got home, sat on bed, squish sound, butt is wet. What the frick? I feel his mattress above from where I'm sitting, and it's wet. I stand up and I look at him sleeping in soaked sheets above me. Proceed to yell at him. Needless to say, I threw it in the shower and told him to get me a new one. Apparently, this isn't that uncommon, and the magic pee theory still holds up. My favorite roommate story is from freshman year. My roommate came home drunk one night and wandered into the dorm basement. She was too drunk to find a bathroom, so she peed in the dryer. Not the washing machine, the dryer. I'm half horrified and half impressed, given the fact that it was a front loader. And in an incredible twist of fate, the next day she forgot her clothes in the washing machine. Some kind gentleman paid to put them in the dryer for her, and it just so happened that it was the one she had peed in the night before. Sometimes I think karma isn't real, and then I read a story like this. Sharon used to eat in her room and then slide the plate under her bed. She'd do this every day until my roommate and I couldn't bear the stink anymore and needed plates for our own dinner. She also regularly invited her substance-dealing boyfriend over to hang out in our apartment during the day. Several times I came home to find deals taking place in our living room. Eventually, the cops were called by one of our neighbors and we, not him, were interrogated and searched. Oh, and there's the time she left a sanitary towel sunny side up on the toilet seat in our shared bathroom. She had some kind of fungal scalp condition that caused her hair to fall out in clumps, which we would frequently have to pull out of plug holes. She then announced she had scabies, and I decided to just lock myself in my room until she moved out. Bizarrely, according to Facebook, she seems to have grown up to become a normal, functioning adult. My first roommate. Oh, the memories. Very heavy, very socially awkward, and definitely psychotic. Often mumbled to himself with shifty eyes, ate my food, and was either railing against the evils of religion or trying to get me to join the Army of the Virgin or some other Catholic sect. He often lounged about in his tighty-whities and refused to clothe himself if I had a guest or girls over. He would just sit down and put a blanket over his lap. I walked in on him cranking it or blaring adult movies a number of times with which he used my tissues. He would also have long phone arguments with his girlfriend, who according to the wallet photo he had of her, was greedily from Captain Planet. The kicker for me was when he had a breakdown and called the RA and a counselor to talk with him while I was writing a paper. He was highly agitated and at one point said, "I just looked over at my roommate while he was asleep and I thought to myself, I should just take a knife and kill him then myself. No offense, John." I was in the zone with my paper, so I automatically replied, "None taken." Then did a double take as the horror dawned on me. Nonplussed eye contact with my RA. I noped the frick out and moved to a different floor. My roommate shaved his chest hair in the kitchen. He also had a super loud Asian girlfriend who screamed during the doing of the deed, even when we had people over. My freshman roommate installed a sliding bolt on the door to our shared room so that I couldn't enter while he was in bed with girls he brought in, which was so random I could never tell when he'd be using the room. The worst part was when I'd get back very late, wanting to get into the room and go to sleep, and he'd have me locked out in the hallway, especially when I had an early class. Even when I waited patiently in the hall, he refused to unlock the door, until one night I knocked harder and he threw a glass full of ice water in my face as he finally opened it. My roommate and his girlfriend's anniversary happened to be on Valentine's Day. On the morning of, I awoke to the smell of chocolate fondue and noticed him making chocolate-dipped strawberries. I commented on how nice he was for doing that, to which he replied, "Yeah, and if she's lucky she'll get my chocolate-dipped wang afterwards." Now, I thought he was joking, but later that night I heard a scream, not out of the ordinary if you know what their bedroom life was like, but that's another story, followed by the door slamming. I went on with my night and figured it was not a big deal. The next morning I saw him in our kitchen and he apologized for the scream. Me being naive, I asked what had happened. His actual response was, "I wanted to give her dessert, so I poured the fondue right onto my eggplant." He then had rushed to the hospital to get his burns treated. I could never look at him or chocolate fondue the same. Well, he had an idea and he committed to it. Gotta respect that. In other news, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to eat either cheese or chocolate fondue again in my life. My freshman roommate was an okay guy, but we didn't really have a ton in common. I think the housing department matched us up simply because we both liked ska music. The guy seemed kind of asexual. He had friends but never had guests, and I couldn't tell if he was gay or straight or what. Keep in mind that in those days, even in the most enlightened circles, some people tried to stay in the closet. Now, one of the things I regret most about college was drinking to excess, and I'd get blotto where I remembered very little about the nights before. One night I was way too hammered and I don't even remember how I got back to my room. But I woke up around 4 a.m. to the oddest dream, which was that while I passed out, my roommate came over to my bed, took off his pants and climbed on top of me. In the dream, I woke up while he was pulling down my pants and I rolled over and with one solid push, shoved him across the room where he crashed into his bed in his tighty whities. I was a lot bigger and stronger than him and sent him flying. I can still see the image of him hitting his bed like it was yesterday. I went back to being passed out and later woke up remembering that weird dream. My roommate was gone, but later that day I saw him and he had a swollen lip. I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt, so I'm not going to say for sure what happened, but a couple of weeks later, one of the guys next door asked me if I wanted to swap roommates and move into his room, and I said yes in a flash. This was 1986, by the way, in a very liberal and gay-friendly college. But even then, there was still a stigma about homosexuality. After we graduated, I heard several stories of people from college who eventually came out. I never cared, but some gay people were still nervous, and unfortunately, there were still some people who were homophobes.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I had a roommate that cranked it, constantly. I would open the door, which was an old-school push combination lock, so it took a few seconds, thank God, and enter. And he'd be shutting his monitor off with his hand over his pants. This seriously happened so much that I actually had to have a talk with him about it after bringing girls over once in a while who would catch him in the act with me and suddenly no longer be in the mood. I don't have a problem with him having a bit of fun with himself, God knows I did it too, but I would catch him twice a week. If I gave you an honest guess, I'd say that he did it more than 5 times a day. Once he did it when I was just going downstairs to the dorm vending machine. I walked down and back up in like 3 minutes and he was hiding his shame already. Freshman year, I got bunked up with an extra roommate due to over-enrollment. A cramped dorm room with 3 guys in it. For a while, things were pretty fun and we were all friends. But after about 2 months, one roommate had a few disgusting habits. First, he, instead of walking literally across the hallway to the bathroom, would pee in an empty or half-empty Gatorade bottle and just let them sit in the open. That was gross. But then he started crapping in takeout boxes and letting them sit all night or day until me and the other roommate got back to yell at him. The third thing is he had a shoebox collection of used rubbers to be cranked into. The smell was so horrendous and awful, it took the RA and whoever else was in charge of housing a month to finally relocate me and the other guy and eventually kick the gross dude out. So for nearly an entire semester, at any time you could walk into our room and see crap in a container with leftovers still in it, a mosaic of different colored pee bottles, or a soggy shoebox on his desk filled with used rubbers. He never went to class and would play video games on his computer until 5 a.m. every day. I still think back on it nearly 10 years later, and I'm blown away with how long it took for any administrative intervention to happen. I mouthed, "What the actual frick" to myself so many times while reading that. How did you cope all that time? Spent some nights in the library or couch crashing at a friend's. Sometimes yelling at him enough would get him to clean up and at least keep his nasty box locked away. But after a couple of days, he would start filling his bottles and boxes again. The guy had no shame, no hygiene, and no respect for those around him. Horrible guy destined to live in a crappy basement apartment, bouncing from one minimum wage job to the next. My roommate once invited a girl that was kicked out of her house to stay with us. Keep in mind that our dorm room was barely larger than a prison cell. I listened to them do the deed on the bottom bunk more times than I care to remember. Your roommate definitely thinks you're the crappy roommate for not leaving when they wanted to do the deed. My roommate just gave me Chipotle money when he wanted to do the deed with his girlfriend. My first year, one of my roommates had his girlfriend over for the weekend. He asked me and my other roommate last minute to clear out for 30 minutes of football Sunday, so they could just get it on. This was like the fourth time he'd asked that weekend, with us agreeing each time, but whatever. He didn't get to see his girlfriend that often, so fair enough. I leave and came back 45 minutes later. She's still there, but they're just talking and the door was open. All clear, right? Around 10 minutes later, he asks me to give them a second and I tell him I'll be in the lounge and to text me when I'm good to come back. He didn't text me. I stayed there for over an hour waiting, but once a friend walked through, I asked him to check if they were still in our room. Nope. He had just left and never told me, while I wasted an hour not watching football. He brought this up in an argument months later, saying that I was a butt for walking in well after the time he'd asked me to stay out, and that he purposefully didn't text me because he was teed off. What the frick? How am I the butthole when I agreed to every single thing he asked? How am I supposed to know that door wide open and just sitting on the bed chatting is code for stay out? Now I'm angry about this all over again. I haven't seen him around the university in forever, so I hope he dropped out. One of my roommates was accused of attempting the unspeakable act on the other during a night of drunken escapades. I had a housemate, 4-person house by the way, who I asked to take care of my dog over one weekend. I never left any of the responsibilities associated with my dog up to anyone else because the rest of the guys were doing me a huge favor by letting me have him there in the first place. This one huge mate wasn't a huge fan of the dog, and when I came home after the weekend, there was crap and pee in my room where presumably my dog was kept most of the weekend. His food and water were in there too, so I guess that's something at least. He was really skittish when I went to say hi to him, so I think my housemate hit or kicked him while I was gone. I had a university flatmate who was a bit nuts. It started out with her just stealing my food. I couldn't leave anything in the kitchen for more than 12 hours or she'd have it. And then she would also put passive-aggressive notes up in our kitchen calling me a liar. I have food allergies, but apparently I was making them up. She was nasty to anyone I had over. She took all of my crockery and put it on top of the cupboards so I couldn't reach it, and I had to climb up and get it all down. She then convinced all of the guys in my flat to take the kitchen furniture and pile it outside my door so I couldn't get out of my room. I got the flu and she spent a day screaming at me through the wall while I alternately cried and slept until my parents came and drove me home. It got to the point where I was considering dropping out of university, but I asked to be put in another flat as a last resort. I got moved into a flat with 5 guys and it was so much messier, but so much nicer. Some people are suggesting that I did something to make her this crazy. I didn't do anything. That's why her behavior was just not understandable in any way. I had my own friends, I kept the kitchen tidy when I used it, I didn't make noise late at night, whatever. She was just looking for a punching bag. This is maybe the second video I've done on crazy flatmates, and I can reassure the author of this story that she is by no means alone in experiencing this kind of monster. They are out there. May the flying spaghetti monster help those who bring them into their homes. My second year of school, I went to an out-of-state school, and I had to get an apartment because there was no room in campus housing for transfer students. My school provided those of us with a list of other students in the same situation so that we might get together and go in on a place to live. So I ended up just doing that with my roommate. Things were great for like 2 years, and then he started going downhill. His grades were slipping, his girlfriend dumped him, and he didn't make the golf team. Poor guy. About this time, he also stopped contributing around the apartment, like cleaning dishes, taking out the trash, buying toilet paper, and other things. I finally decided to keep my own toilet paper stashed in my room in a locked cabinet. Days went by and no toilet paper showed up in the bathroom. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into a little over a month. One day my girlfriend was over, and she had to go to the bathroom. She finished up, washed her hands, and then went to dry her hands on the towel hanging over the toilet when I heard her freak out. The underside of the towel was covered in crap stains. My roommate had been wiping his butt with the towel above the toilet and hanging it back up. I have no idea how I could never smell it. I ended up throwing the towel on his bed and leaving him a roll of toilet paper with a note that said, "I think you need this more than I do." We never spoke again after that, and then our lease was up soon after and we parted ways. I just cannot even fathom being so depressed or whatever that I would rather wipe my butt with the same towel repeatedly than buy some frickin' toilet paper. My roommate was this geeky 400-pound guy who watched Sailor Moon in the original Japanese. He had a tiny red-headed girlfriend who regularly beat the crap out of him in daily life, and he let her. At like 6 p.m. on a Thursday, he suddenly asked me if I could vacate the dorm until 11, as they're going back to have some romantic time. I was a little teed off he gave me no warning, but I left anyway. Got back at midnight and walked into a scene of her in black vinyl gear with a riding crop and a taxi driver's hat, riding him, with him covered in welts from head to toe. I noped the heck right out of there. I had a roommate who was racist and obsessed with World War II Germany. I thought it was just in a History Channel kind of way at first. He then chose to read Mein Kampf for a class. Then he started writing juvenile bathroom graffiti in German in the stalls. He became upset when he found out I dated a black girl in high school. Then the swastika graffiti started showing up in the dorm elevator, along with the N-word drawn in a noose. He had a knife collection. He seriously came back after the first week with an end table, folding chair, and an easy chair, despite the fact that the room had no real extra space for any of it. He smelled and tried to get rid of the room smell with a whole can of peach renizit one day. He left food garbage in his trash, left for the weekend, and when I emptied it because it was smelling, he got mad at me for touching his stuff. He said he'd take care of me if I did it again. He said he hated kids. He was a special ed major. I asked why he'd majored in that if he hated kids, and he said, "There are 52 special ed majors in this school, and I'm one of only 2 guys." I moved out at the start of the next semester as soon as they'd let me. I paid the extra money for a single the next year. I've just looked him up, found a picture of him in black facial makeup and some creepy black and white photos. No, there's nothing wrong with reading Mein Kampf or having a knife collection or not liking kids in and of themselves. Context, people, context. Not a college roommate, but RAF trade training. My roommate came back paralytic drunk, having spewed in the sink in the block shower room until it was so full to the brim, only then to go on and have a nice long pee all over my TV and my shiny new Xbox 360. He was very apologetic the next day, as well as very hungover, which was hilarious to watch in Fizz and Inspection Parade, and he cleaned it all up, so I forgave him for the situation. What commonly accepted historical inaccuracies drive historians crazy? Albert Einstein didn't fail mathematics in school as is commonly believed. Upon being shown a column making this claim, Einstein said, "I never failed mathematics. Before I was 15, I'd mastered differential and integral calculus. Thanks a lot. Now I have no excuse for failing my pre-calc class." I mean, I think not being Einstein is a pretty good excuse. Poor Einstein, he had no excuses. I'm not a historian, just Mexican, and let me say that Cinco de Mayo is not Mexican Independence Day. I am a historian, and let me just say that it drives me mad when people think the Aztecs, actually the Mexica, thought that Cortez was a god. They were 100% clear on the fact that he wasn't. People like to vilify Dona Marina Malinche Malintzin, but she's pretty much proof that nobody thought Cortez was a god, since she actually gave the orders. People also love to think the Spanish showed up with 500 men and took over the capital of the biggest empire in the New World, But they conveniently forget that Tlaxicans have pretty bloody hands in that respect as well, especially considering the fact that they talked Cortez into making a quick detour to Cholula to fricking slaughter everyone. There's a very prevalent myth about a famous speech given by John F. Kennedy in Berlin. The story goes that his statement, "Ich bin ein Berliner," translates to "I am a jelly donut." While Berliner is a word for a type of jelly-filled pastry, no one at the time thought that's what Kennedy meant. The general story is that Kennedy should have said "Ich bin Berliner" rather than "Ich bin ein Berliner." People claim that adding the indefinite article ein is the problem. While ein does give nuance to the statement, it didn't make anyone at the time think Kennedy was talking about being a donut. Had he said "Ich bin Berliner," his statement would have conveyed a sense of him being a Berlin native, which obviously he was not. "Ich bin ein Berliner," however, means something closer to "I am one with the people of Berlin," which is exactly what Kennedy wanted to say. No halfway intelligent German speaker at the time thought Kennedy was talking about food. In fact, the first time the alternate translation of the sentence is noted wasn't until 20 years later in 1983. I must admit that I bought this myth hook, line, and sinker. I blame Eddie Izzard, as likely to many people of my age or older. First, that Roman gladiatorial battles were bloodbaths with like 30 men dying in one fight. I read something very recently saying that 1 in 200 fights ended in killing. Gladiators are freaking expensive, and you don't just get them killed. I'm not saying that there are no accounts of large battles with many deaths. I'm saying that they were rare. When a man was injured, fight over. The second was that Nero played the fiddle and sang while Rome burned. He was in Antium and hurried back to Rome. My source is Tacitus. I used Tacitus since he's a primary source and a contemporary Roman historian. Firstly, a large amount of the information we have on this time period is skewed by the fact that the Christian Church produced and held a large amount of the records. And if you think that the Romans hated Nero, wait till you see what the Christians thought of him. Secondly, if you're really interested in learning more, the fine community at Reddit Ask Historians is full of the most knowledgeable and polite bunch of Redditors you'll have the pleasure of interacting with. Now, to expand on Nero, there are other accounts of him spearheading the relief efforts and housing refugees in what was left of the imperial palace. The Equites were really not fond of Nero, though, and since they were the ones that wrote the history books, we get a demonized image of Nero. I'm also glad that you pointed out the gladiatorial misconception. Gladiators were very well cared for by those that owned them. The misconception probably stems from the use of arenas as execution grounds for prisoners and the like. They would often be killed en masse, which could easily be mixed up with the gladiators being tossed in to die as the years went on. Those points aside, I'd like to address a couple of things. On Nero, he was one of the worst emperors of Rome. He was egotistical, violent, paranoid, and, this is important, very young. He openly scoffed at the Senate, which still attempted to act like it had power, but was referred to as a club for washed-up old men, and Nero did as he wished. He would belittle wealthy and influential men, seduce their wives, and generally act like the brutally violent, petulant child that he was. We cannot confirm or deny that he did in fact set fire to Rome, which was rumored, as it was said he wanted to build a massive palace and bath complex in the city center, and we can't confirm that he spearheaded the relief efforts and housed refugees, which is either a lie from his PR team, exaggerated truth, or actual truth. What we can confirm is the fact that Nero used the radical Christian cult, which is exactly what it was at this point in history, as the scapegoats for the disaster, resulting in severe persecution of the Christians at the hands of the Romans by order of Nero. The cult was outlawed for a time, and this was where the beginning of the rumors of Nero being the beast can typically be traced. As for gladiators, yes, they would fight lions. No, it wouldn't be often. Lions are expensive. Gladiators are more expensive. There are plenty of instances where large numbers of exotic animals were killed en masse, and even a few instances of gladiators. But the majority of the time, death was reserved for the dishonored gladiator, the unlucky gladiator, and, most commonly, those unfortunate enough to be sentenced to death in the arena. A nice, bloody practice target for a gladiator. I know more about the gladiator diet than their actual combat and interaction, however, so I won't really dive any further than I've already done. The ye in ye olde is actually abbreviated as an early modern English letter called thorn that was pronounced like th, so it's pronounced more like the oldie than anything else. Also, because Gutenberg's printing press didn't have thorn, so they improvised with y. That Paul Revere actually staged a midnight ride and was the only one who did so. He actually went from large to large warning people, then got his butt arrested. Then he escaped later on in the night. Paul Revere's Ride, written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in 1860, when Revere had been dead for 40 years. It's kind of a dramatization of the events of the night and plays up Revere and downplays the involvement of others like William Dawes. Possibly because the poem starts with, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." Dawes doesn't fit with the rhyme scheme. When Revere died, his obituary didn't even mention his ride. Longfellow was just lazy. Dawes would have been easy. It rhymes just as well as Revere. Hear the story of William Dawes, his midnight ride and noble cause. Boom! Did that in 20 seconds. That Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." Also, most of the misconceptions about her in general. She led a really sad life as a pawn in her mother's game, and a lot of the things that people assume about her come from a lack of understanding about the role of a Queen of France at the time and the French court. She personally preferred a less opulent lifestyle by court standards, but was seen as snubbing the court by trying to make changes to it. Her marriage wasn't very happy either, and later her own daughter didn't remember her very fondly because she generally tried to raise her kids to not be spoiled. She wasn't without her faults or mistakes, but by reading a lot of biographies about her, you start to understand how the image of Madame Deficit and the real woman don't match up. For anyone wondering about the origins of the quote came from a book and was attributed to A Great Princess. It was written in Rousseau's Confessions and was published when Marie Antoinette would have been just 9 years old and still living in Austria. That most of the slaves in the triangle trade ended up in the USA. Wrong. Just plain wrong. The majority of ships shipped from Africa ended up in South or Central America or the West Indies. Just to add to this, so many slaves were shipped to the West Indies because it was cheaper to work current slaves to death and just replace them rather than give them even a substandard quality of life. The same is true for the mass majority of slaves today, of which there are approximately 27 million. One thing that really bothered a professor I had was that when people discussed the leaders of Germany immediately prior to World War II, they frequently labeled them as psychopaths, insane, or crazy. This is especially true of their leader. When discussing him, people right off the bat label him as evil, a monster, an addict, had one ball, basically any reason to distance him from a normal person. You can't just dismiss what happened in Germany as craziness. There were rational people making decisions and running the country. My professor would call us out on it, and ever since then, I notice it a lot, and it irks me too. It's true. We can't just assume that removing the crazy people from government will get rid of this ever-looming threat that we still face today. There are very calculating people who will use others' fears and insecurities to gain power, no matter how many groups they have to kill to get there. The one that makes me mad was that the Titanic was in any way badly designed, badly built, or badly operated by the standards of the time. In fact, there are so many ridiculous inaccuracies surrounding the Titanic that it's hard to list even a fraction of them here. She was an incredibly seaworthy ship, much more so than any passenger ship around today. The iceberg tore a gash almost a third of the way down her side, and she still stayed afloat for more than 2 hours. In that time, all but 2 of her lifeboats were launched. There wasn't time to launch any more. She could have had 100 more lifeboats on board, and that wouldn't have helped without vastly more crew to operate them. Titanic's passengers genuinely believed that she was practically unsinkable. When the time came to begin loading the lifeboats, many passengers thought they would be safer staying on the Titanic. There wasn't time for the crew to wait around, so when the lifeboat was ready and there was no one else waiting to get in, it had to go. This is why so many of Titanic's lifeboats left only half full. Titanic wasn't traveling too fast for the conditions, by the standards of practice around at the time. Further precautions were put into practice after the incident, but no one on board can be blamed for doing what anyone on any ship would have done the same. She wasn't built using substandard materials. This rumor goes around a lot these days because of an article that was written some time ago. What the article is supposed to mean is that there was much better quality steel available today. This was not the case in 1909. Additionally, Titanic's builders were paid on a fee plus materials basis. They were given a set fee to construct the ship, plus the cost of all materials used. There was no incentive to use anything but the best steel they could get their hands on. The shipyard had an excellent reputation and would not risk tainting it by using bad steel, which could easily be noticed on inspection anyway. Titanic and her 2 sister ships, the Olympic and Britannic, were also surprisingly maneuverable for their size. Much more so than expected. Some will tell you that Titanic's rudder was too small, but this simply isn't true. In fact, Olympic's wartime captain marveled at her maneuverability and was even able to throw her into a sudden turn, ramming and sinking a German U-boat. Olympic was the only merchant vessel throughout the First World War recorded to have sunk an enemy vessel. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Galileo's models at the time of the controversy were less accurate than the geocentric models for predicting movements of celestial bodies, important for navigation. There was ample reason to be skeptical. The Catholic response was primarily because he decided to insult the Pope, his patron, not his scientific views. Church views on geocentric system were largely based on Greek models and not the scripture. Since his parody of the Pope was done within his works advocating heliocentrism, the Church requested he cease to publish them, but allowed him to publish about other scientific subjects. He agreed to do so. He later broke that promise, leading to the famous trials. It wasn't a war against science, it was politics. The myth that Napoleon was tiny. He was actually above average height. This mistake is due to the fact that the French inches were different from the English inches, I believe. And that there are paintings where he's depicted with French grenadiers, which usually were the biggest soldiers in the French army and all towered over him. Also, British propagandists were really good at the time, so they convinced everyone, including America to this day, that he was short. That people in the Middle Ages used spices to mask the flavor of meat that had gone bad. If you could afford spices that were traded from far-off lands at great expense, you could well afford fresh meat. Well, what about local spices? Cumin grew all over the Mediterranean and was used more often than black pepper, which is from India. The ancient Greeks kept cumin at the dining table in its own container, much as pepper is frequently kept today, and this practice continues in Morocco. Cumin was also heavily used in ancient Roman cuisine. The source is Wikipedia here, though. So isn't it plausible that poorer Indians used a variety of things to preserve meat and mask the flavor of lower quality stuff, while poorer Europeans used local cumin for the same purpose? Obviously, people enjoy spices anyway, but it doesn't seem outlandish that poor people would use whatever was local and cheap in greater quantities, whereas richer people would have access to the exotic stuff and use it for more variety. Although even wealthy Romans used spices far in excess compared to what our contemporary palates are used to, essentially masking what we think good meat should taste like, so maybe our entire concept of seasoning just doesn't translate to their time. But the fact is, there were definitely peasants who took their chances on varying grades of crappy meat, but also access to cheap local spices. I think people forget that there's a scale from stomachache to full-on 48-hour gut-wrenching, spew-inducing hell caused by food poisoning, and peasants would be hard-pressed to waste something that was only a little bit spoiled. A quick search also reveals that cumin and coriander are recommended by a lot of websites for treating very mild cases of food poisoning. Any beneficial properties of something so abundant and commonly used back then would have been known through folk recipes and such. The idea that Columbus was trying to prove that the Earth was round, or that anyone at the time period even believed that the Earth was flat. Columbus thought that the distance to India was much shorter than everyone else thought. That's why he went that way. Of course, everyone else was right and the distance was much greater, but America was in the way. This is what I was taught about the whole situation. Is there any truth to it? This is correct. Columbus believed that India was about 3 times closer than it actually is. Those who believed Columbus's voyage would fail did so because had he not run into the Americas, he and his crew would have starved long before ever reaching the Orient. Mark Twain didn't say, "The coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco." I've seen quite a few quotes attributed to him that are really of unknown origin. I think because of his wide range of writings, it's easy to claim that he wrote something. The Vikings never wore horns on their helmets. The only reason we believe that is because of poems and tales of the Vikings saying they did so. We found remains of Vikings and non-horned helmets after the idea that they had horns on their helmet was popularized. Just think about it. Aren't horns on helmets a little impractical and inconvenient? You would never use them, and it would make a great handle for the enemy to drag your head to the floor. There are horned helmets at the National Museum of Denmark. Long before the Scandinavians started raiding, and therefore became what we think of as Vikings, their shamans might have worn horned helmets. These helmets predate not only the introduction of Christianity to Denmark, but also the Scandinavian take on the Roman pantheon, Odin, Frigg, Thor, and the others. Yeah, I think anyone who's done even the most general of history courses on Europe has been aware of this, but it's probably a good idea to shout it out to the listeners who don't know. That people who lived before modern medicine lived much shorter lives. When we say that the average life expectancy of an individual in, say, the year 1100 was 35, it doesn't mean that most people lived to around 35 and then suddenly died. It means that mainly due to high childhood mortality and death during childbirth rates, the average age of death was driven down. If you survived childhood and pregnancy, you had a fairly good chance to live well into your 60s or 70s. Of course, people died more often from diseases and malnutrition, but these were marginal factors in reducing the average life expectancy compared to childhood mortality and death during childbirth. Pocahontas and John Smith. Thanks to Disney, no one remembers that Pocahontas was a 12-year-old girl that was kidnapped by a 30-plus-year-old man, dragged from her home, and killed by a disease that she had no immunity to. That a katana is somehow the best sword humanity ever created, and that the samurai were the best swordsmen. Bullcrap! The katana is great, assuming you're fighting in Japan. As soon as you hit somewhere with metal armor, specifically Europe, that sword actually kinda sucks. Also, when you break down sword fighting among all the major sword cultures of Europe, Japan, China, some parts of India, 75% of it is the same crap, mostly with variances in footwork. Europeans could handle a sword just as well as the Japanese. The katana is celebrated because Japan and its samurai class celebrate it. The reality during actual wartime was that the sword was not nearly as important as other weapons, and the real warriors were prized on their skills with other weapons, like the bow or the naginata, which is a weapon not unlike a lance. Swords were like sidearms, and the other weapons were the mainstay. Once peacetime came and the samurai had nothing better to do with their time and money besides wax philosophical, they spent a lot of time glorifying and romanticizing the past. And that's where a lot of the veneration of the sword, bushido, and even the term samurai comes from. Exactly. Just like everyone else. Swords are great in duels. In actual battle, they're actually too difficult to maneuver with everyone crushing in around you. The exemption of the American-Philippine War from lower levels of history classes. I didn't even hear about it, much less learn about it until I took an AP class. Yeah, people really don't learn how crappy America has been sometimes. Yeah, George W. Bush offered the standard US high school explanation of the Spanish-American War during a visit to Manila once, and I facepalmed. The version where Spain totally had it coming because they blew up our one ship? Yeah, and we were greeted as great liberators by the Filipinos who graciously submitted to a half-century more of colonialism with no questions asked. Good old imperialism, the system where everybody wins. It's topics like this that fill me with information that tends to only be useful in making people not like me when I correct them. Knowing things makes me lonely. The common American myth that Jesse James was an American Robin Hood. Jesse James was a fiery rebel who killed unarmed and innocent people who posed no threat to him and robbed southern as well as northern banks and trains. Jesse's murderer is frequently referred to as the coward Robert Ford. While Ford did shoot him while facing his back, Jesse James once shot an innocent man named John Sheets who was merely filling out a bank slip. Jesse James never gave any money back to people who needed it or really had any chivalrous qualities other than deluding himself that he was a southern gentleman. The truth is that Jesse James was a domestic terrorist who stole and victimized dozens of people, killed innocents, and aggrandized himself by stealing the success of others. As someone from the UK, I think people forget about how crappy the country has acted over the centuries. We're obviously not the root of all evil, but people forget. We seem to celebrate the abolition of slavery and look at the US as the ones with slaves, when we'd been carting slaves around the world for a substantially longer time. Having a huge empire might have sounded quite cool and civilizing, but we were pretty awful in some cases, especially with how we treated the Aborigines. The Tories seem to want to bring back the pride in the history of the empire, but it's something we should have looked at more objectively. The same goes for Belgium. Leopold II killed a lot of people. He was responsible for the death of about 10 to 12 million Congolese people. Yet nobody really seems to remember. It just doesn't have the same impact, all because we haven't heard of it or we didn't watch enough documentaries about it. The relative scope of World War II on the Western Front versus the Eastern Front. People never understand or are even taught the sheer magnitude and difference. Americans are taught as if we were basically what won the war in Europe. It's pretty darn misleading. Fun fact, 80% of German combat power was used on the Eastern Front. In reality, D-Day, while significant, did not win the war in Europe. A few battles I would say are more significant would be Stalingrad and, of course, Kursk. People have no idea of the sheer size of the war on the Eastern Front, not to mention the brutality on both sides. You know it must suck when German troops consider fighting on the Western Front a break or vacation. That there were just 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. There was pretty much every other Greek city-state there at the time. Sparta fielded one of the smallest armies there and reluctantly went to war because they initially wanted to stay behind on their little peninsula. Even after the crap hit the fan and the rest of the Greeks retreated, there were still 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans as well as 300 Spartans that fought to the last. What really rustles my jimmies about it is that the Spartans couldn't be seen as retreating, they had to fight by the morals and laws that had been drummed into them. The Thebans and Thespians just stayed behind because they had gonads of steel, even though in those days they were more of a militia than trained soldiers like the Spartans, and they get zero recognition. Croissants are not French. Everyone, including the French, associates them with France, but really, the croissant is Austrian. After a baker in Vienna saw that the Turks were coming, the alarm was sounded just in time. When eventually the Turks were beaten back, the baker was allowed to make a celebratory pastry for the occasion. He created a crescent moon, since this was the Islamic and Turkish symbol. We skipped to Marie Antoinette. She loved the croissant and took the recipe with her to France. From then on, it became one of the most famous pastries of all time. What's the worst job you've ever had? I sprinkled mud onto potatoes that had already been washed, so they'd look freshly dug when they hit the supermarket. Most depressing holiday job I've ever had. There are some terrible jobs on here, but this is so brilliantly, horribly futile, incomprehensibly pointless. I spent a week working the business end of the MECSEP 2000, the actual name of the machine is repressed deep down inside me, which was a grinding horror that separated tiny scraps of chicken meat from splinters of bone. The chicken was delivered in frozen 10-kilogram blocks. Me and 3 or 4 other chosen ones had the task of breaking up the gore block with a chisel and feeding it into the mechanical maw. One day, one of our blocks consisted entirely of wishbones. Thousands of them. I've had terrible jobs, but nothing compares to this guy that called into a radio contest for worst job titles, as his was Chicken Butthole Remover. He stood on the slaughter line and made sure the carcasses were butthole free. If they weren't, it was his job to fix it. Tell us why you won this job. Well, I've always been passionate about not eating chicken buttholes, so I figured I could do some good in the world. Just making sure one family doesn't accidentally consume chicken poo strainer is enough for me. Dancing bear. I was a waiter at a kids' restaurant which had a bear as its mascot. The new guy had to be the bear on their first day, which meant putting on a massive bear costume over our waiter's uniform, including a huge fur head that you could barely see out of. You were then led around the place to wave at the parents and play with the kids once per hour. If you spoke, you were fired, as some of these kids were return customers who would recognize the waiter's voice. Wanting to impress my boss, I really hammed it up. I danced, I gestured, I goofed around, I sat on a mother's lap, I ruffled a father's hair while he growled, "Get off me or I'll stab you." The boss loved it so much that he made me be the bear every day that I worked there. Which would be great, except that it was August and so hot that the restaurant's aircon broke. The bear suit hadn't been washed in the history of the restaurant, so served as a memorial to the sweat of 100 fallen waiters. Little kids would run headfirst at the bear and headbutt my family jewels with depressing regularity, and all it earned me was the disgust of my wait team who thought I was goofing off work by being the bear, since it was clearly easier than carrying 2 plates of reheated lasagna across the room and refilling drinks. As many other commenters noted, I was relieved when this person clarified that the job in question was someone in a bear costume and not a live bear in a children's restaurant. Admittedly, the bear's job in that theoretical situation wouldn't be great either. Cutting fancy glass for use in mosaics. A glass cutter is basically a pen with a small metal wheel at one end and a metal ball on the other. Fancy glass is thick, heavy, expensive, and sharp. The weight, thickness, and texture changes drastically. One might be a 3 cm smooth green glass sheet, and the next might be a textured 5 cm piece of orange. There is no training, and glass dust is a thing. My fingertips were swollen with tiny shards of glass, and I broke much more glass than I was worth. It was a short gig. I just can't fathom why someone would do a task like that without at least considering wearing some kind of protective glove. Kinda reminds me of a task I used to do when I worked in some labs. We used an oxyhydrogen torch on a stand to cut or seal quartz vials. They came as a straw, and you'd cut it in half, closing each half on one end when forming the cut. Then we'd fill them with organic sample material, often powdered hair or toenails, and then use the torch and a weak vacuum to seal the open end with the sample inside. That way, the mass of the sample is permanently stored and can be irradiated and analyzed over and over. Anyway, this task essentially meant that you had to be holding this tiny little vial about the diameter of a drinking straw in a torch flame hot enough to melt fricking quartz, above 1600 degrees, in a matter of 2 seconds or so, and your bare fingers were about 2 inches from the flame. There was no way you'd have the dexterity to do it with leather gloves on, and anything else would be at risk of melting into your flesh if you accidentally got burned. That was a rather unnerving task. My worst was probably for a moving company. Everyone dreads moving day, and for me, that was every day. I liked it. New houses with new challenges and new people to charm out of tip money every day. I also got a nice workout. It was the illiterate morons I had to work with and scamming bosses that got me out of it. Hotel housekeeping. If it comes out of the human body, I've cleaned it up. I started in a by-the-hour motel when I was 14, owned by a woman who didn't bother with hazardous waste procedure and cleaned up what looked like a murder scene with nothing but bleach and kitchen gloves. I walked into that room and was absolutely positive that when I pulled back the shower curtain, there was going to be a body in the bathtub. Thankfully, there wasn't, just blood everywhere. The owner refused to let me call the police and just made me clean it, and I didn't want to get in crap for bleaching a murder scene at 14, so I never did call the cops. That hotel owner definitely killed someone and made you clean it up. Picking mangoes in Australia. Many people are unaware that if you snap the stalk on a mango, poisonous sap flies out, which makes you blister quite dramatically. Also the best job because of the beautiful scenery. Australia, where even the fruit can kill ya. I worked at a slaughterhouse for a little while. They killed steers there but got pork shipped in. The hams came in a giant cardboard vat, probably 5 feet wide and 4 feet deep. They were heavily waxed on the inside to make them waterproof and had steel banding running around the outside, kind of like an old keg or barrel. Once we fished out most of the hams and trimmed them, there was always a couple of feet of blood at the bottom. As the new guy, it was my job to dangle over the edge with a meat hook in one hand, fishing out the remaining hams and scraps. Usually, it was about an hour in shoulder-deep blood with your face next to the surface. I worked in an office, entry-level job after a career switch. My boss was a crazy woman, never happy, never satisfied, always changing her mind and blaming everyone else. One day she called me into her office and she gave me 2 projects, and got mad when I asked her questions about how she wanted them. At the end of the meeting, I asked her, "Which of these 2 do you need first?" Her answer? Both. I thought she had misunderstood my question, so I repeated, "But which of them do you need first?" "Both." "No, really, which of these 2 do you need first?" Her answer at this point was yelling, "Both, both, 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 both." A few months later, I had enough of her crap and I went to HR to complain about her treatment of the staff. Of course, she had a friend in the HR department and she got wind of it. And she called me in her office and she complained about me complaining about her, and she told me, "You don't complain here, you leave." That was my clue. I called my headhunter and found myself a new, better job with better pay. A few years later, I'd built my career and I was actually ahead of her in responsibility and position. I met her at a conference and she was giving false praise how I was one of the best workers she'd ever had, and then rhetorically asked me why I left, in front of other people. I told her that I had to thank her for my career since she was the one who suggested I leave by telling me, "You don't complain here, you leave." She really didn't like that one. A lovely bit of vicarious justice for those of us who've ever had a crappy and insincere manager in their lives. Revenge like this is very sweet indeed. Door-to-door solar panel salesman for a corrupt home energy company. Nothing better than knocking on someone's front door right in the middle of a Patriots game. I did door-to-door home renovations, windows, doors, sliding, etc. right after the 2008 market crash. I can't tell you how many people told me they weren't going to be able to make their next mortgage payment, let alone spend $20,000 on new windows. Soul-crushing. Crash or no crash, it's still pretty hard even now when the economy is not so bad and people still can't afford $20,000 on new windows. Internship at a public relations firm in college. I was promised agency experience, writing opportunities, and valuable experience. Turns out what they actually meant was sitting in a room for 8 hours cold calling CEOs from an outdated call list and trying to trick them into a sales presentation. Might I add, about a month into the job they hired a new intern manager who was the epitome of Massachusetts trash. Drove to work every day from the Cape on his Harley, it was 2 hours one way, and lauded his degree from Bunker Hill Community College. He chain-smoked and DJ'd on the side at trash North Shore nightclubs. He insisted on sitting in the room with us for 8 hours to check if we were actually making calls, all while berating us for being poor employees and cheap labor. On my last day of the internship, he called me into his office and told me, "The only reason you're still here is because we didn't have to pay you. You'll never be successful like me. You're not cut out for the business world. If I were you, I'd drop out and try to find a trade you'll succeed in." Even as a 19-year-old, I knew an idiot when I saw one. I looked him square in the eye and said, "You can go F yourself," and walked out with the other interns. He then wrote a letter of complaint to my school to try and have my internship credit revoked. But luckily my advisor knew the situation and cut him out. Dan the DJ, if you're reading this, I want you to know I took your advice and did my best to never become you. Being poor means being willing to do effed up things for tiny bits of money, so I've had more sucky jobs than I can count. But the one that stands out the most is door-to-door political fundraising and canvassing. This was back in the early 90s. The way it worked was that you had a clipboard, a pen, petition, and some envelopes. The whole crew would meet at the office and then pile into the 15-passenger vans. The supervisor would drive us out to a territory, or turf, anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours away from the office. Then they would divide us into pairs and give each pair of canvassers a map marked with the pair's assigned turf. If I recall correctly, we started knocking on doors around 3 or 4 p.m. and kept it up until 8 p.m. In that time, we were supposed to knock on people's doors and talk to them about whatever issue we were working on at that point. When I did my brief stint, it was nursing home reform legislation. Then we were supposed to get the occupant to sign our petition and make a contribution, preferably a check or charge on the spot. Our nightly quota was $120 per person. If you think that people hate having telemarketers call their houses at dinner time to ask them for money, just imagine how much they love it when those same telemarketers show up unannounced on their front doorsteps. Between crappy weather, vicious dogs, smackheads and tweakers answering the door, people's pervasive hatred of trespassers and solicitors, and constant fear of being fired for missing my quota, field canvassing was definitely one of the worst jobs I've ever had.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I worked at a used car lot for about a month my first summer home from college. Pay was decent and under the table. The summer of 2001, I was getting paid $15 an hour, which was awesome for a college kid looking to save up for beer money in the fall. I was the lot boy and prepped the cars that were sold, charged up the batteries on the ones that had been sitting for a while, and picked up lunch for the sales team. Overall, it wasn't bad, but the work was tedious in the sun, and the people that I worked with were odd. Sales guy 1. When he wasn't selling used cars, he was a bouncer or door guy at a third-rate adult club. He would borrow our high-end SUVs to drive escorts on the weekends. Without the boss knowing, he would have me put dealer plates on them after the owner left on Saturday afternoons. Sales guy 2. This was a peak rap or rock era, and he dressed and acted like a Fred Durst clone. Bragged about how he had multiple girlfriends and would make them bring him food at alternating times. One afternoon, the lunch schedule got crossed and we had an amazing trashy girl fight in the parking lot. The office manager was the former girlfriend of Sales Guy 1 and Sales Guy 2, who retired from dancing at the club to go straight. She still escorted on the weekends, though, processed finance applications and did the cash drops at the bank. The owner. He paid everything in cash and specialized in selling cars for just below $10,000. Every Friday, we had a customer who would come in and co-sign on a crappy Nissan Altima with $80K on it and would pay in cash. Always from New York or North Jersey. I just assumed they were engaging in substance dealing or human trafficking. Our mechanic was a quiet guy. He kept to himself and would listen to classic rock all day. After about a week, he told me he was happy for the job as he had been away for a while. He was good about showing me how to work on engines, and we would hang out in the garage drinking Miller High Life out of paper cups. The guy loved Steely Dan. After about a month, I noped right out of there. While the pay was good, the ongoing drama of the people I worked with wasn't enough to hang around. Sales Guy 2 had just gotten arrested on the lot for failing to pay child support, and I knew I was just a few days away of being guilty by association or something. I was a furnace helper in a steel factory. We made bumper mounts and hinges for truck hoods and other heavy steel parts. I unloaded red-hot metal parts from the furnace with a pair of tongs. I used to catch fire 2 or 3 times a day. I hated that. Never have I seen someone so casually drop the fact that they regularly immolated themselves as part of their work. That's not far off referencing that they only had to ward off a few axe-wielding psychopaths from time to time in my book. Dealer in a casino. You learn a lot about different games and get to play cards all shift. You also make some pretty good coin with tips and whatnot. However, you get to meet some of the worst people on the planet. When people start losing money at your table, several hundred to several thousand at a time, suddenly that fun atmosphere becomes soul-suckingly tense, to the point of, you better hope you're not walking alone when you're off tonight. But you get to call your pit boss over and say, this patron just threatened me, and boom, booted out of the casino, banned for 6 months to a year, and possibility of criminal charges. Sometimes I got a nice justice semi working there. Anyone who's thinking of being a dealer, it's definitely not for everyone. If you ever wanted to work wonders for your confidence and have the ability to become a stone when it comes to people being absolute crapheads to you, I suggest it. I think back to what skills I've gained from my time dealing. I've learned to be grateful, and when I have a crap day, I remind myself that I'm not dealing anymore. When people get sarcastic or angry or crappy towards me, it doesn't bother me anymore because I've dealt, no pun intended, with the worst. If you're a student and can handle taking a lot of crap, or want to learn how to handle taking a lot of crap, try being a dealer. You make great money at the cost of your social life. You generally work nights and all through the weekends. One of the things I didn't really mention, but it's implied, when people are giving you crap at your table, you have to stand there and take it. You don't have the option to walk away. Hopefully, your pit bosses are good enough to have your back.
I'm a dealer at a smaller casino, and it's the most soul-sucking job I've ever done. You see the worst in everyone, because, let's be honest, no one is ever a winner in the long-run gambling. At least your pit bosses actually throw people out for threatening dealers. Ours walk the other way or act like they don't hear the guy screaming and calling the female dealer a working girl or the C word.
I collected baby batter from chickens for artificial insemination. You have to, help get them off. Not my job. I just walk into the room and the frickers immediately begin to expel the white gold. We then have to rush them and get the collection vial in place quickly or the day's worth of product was lost. So much stuff on my gloves. Ugh. Worked for the UMG straight out of high school processing CD orders. It was still a thing back then. I was 17 and the only guy in the office, working with nothing but 40-plus-year-old women. Sweet Christ, the raunchiest conversations that led to me discovering the definition of TMI. The work was fine, just data entry, and they had a massive backlog when I arrived. In the first week, I cleared it all out, and no one in the office had anything to do, including myself. I couldn't browse the web. I brought a book into the office and was reading it, and got yelled at by my supervisor for it. I explained that I had nothing to do, and sitting around staring at nothing for 8 hours a day was torture. What about our backlog? It's gone. That can't be true. Well, go and check for yourself. They came back. Well, okay, if you have nothing to do, come and talk to me. After a week of coming to them every hour on the hour asking for something to do, and them saying they had nothing, they yelled at me again for bugging them. They eventually fired me for refusing to come in 10 minutes prior to my scheduled time, unpaid, and logging into the phones. There was nothing going on, and I sure as crap wasn't going to sit around doing nothing for 1 more minute than I had to, much less unpaid. A close second was many years later, I was brought into packaged software for a company that had bought another company. Get it up to their standards, make sure it's installed silently, etc. They didn't have a place for me to sit, so they put me in an unheated warehouse. In the winter. With massive bay doors that opened up 4 to 6 times a day for deliveries. After working there for a month, I still didn't even have a computer to work on. At the end of that month, I got a computer, but there was nothing for me to do still. It took me a week to track down my manager after this point, and he said that they wouldn't have work for me for a few more months. Aren't you lucky? You get to do nothing and collect a paycheck, he said to me. Yeah, real lucky. Then they brought on another guy for some reason to do the same job. We were both incredibly confused, to say the least. After another month and having to read about 24 books, I just stopped showing up, submitted my time and checked my email every day to see if there was any work to do, as well as sending weekly emails asking if there were any tasks coming my way soon to my manager. Finally, after 2 months, they caught on and let me go. I didn't feel bad about it in the slightest. I can't believe roofing isn't on here. That is the absolute fricking worst. Pretty much like being a human egg on a griddle all day with a side order of heaving shingles around and trying not to fall and break your neck. I was a cashew flicker at a candy factory. Literally, I flicked the bad cashews off a conveyor belt. Managed a local restaurant, worked 10 to 12-hour days, often with closing and leaving at 1 a.m., only to be back to open at 8 a.m. 6 days a week with an 8 a.m. meeting on my only one full day off. Pyramid scheme selling Kirby vacuums for in-house demonstrations. I got out of that within a couple of weeks. I got offered a job doing this. I went to the interview and he said I'd earn around £2,200 a month, which sounded amazing, but I thought it was a bit too good to be true and didn't take it in the end. I didn't realize it was a pyramid scheme, though. A unanimous recurring factor on all the many terrible job, quitting, and interview stories that I've done for this channel has been how prevalent these schemes are at sneaking into the serious job market. You've been warned, folks. I took a job with a marketing company working at the mall trying to get people to take surveys. Literally hundreds of people walking right by you, refusing to make eye contact. It's like being a ghost. Horrible job, hated every second of it. I quit after 6 hours. Lifeguard. It was hours upon hours of boredom intermingled with seconds of sheer terror. Glorified cleaners. Spent most of my time cleaning changing rooms and toilets with a bit of time on poolside doing jack all. In 4 years, there was one rescue when I was on shift, and I was mopping the floor in reception. Lifeguard is the best job I've had. For one, our rules were probably a bit different, but I worked at a beach, and by our rules, we could only sit for half an hour at a time. So in an 8-hour day, we only worked a max of 4 hours. The other 4, we would read a book or something. Also, as a lifeguard, you could check out hot women and not be seen as a creep. I didn't actually take the job, but it would have been the worst by far. I applied for a position in an industrial bakery as a sanitation technician. As advertised, the job would entail disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling equipment. But when I showed up for my interview, really an informal orientation, the nice lady told me I would actually be standing at one end of a conveyor belt and given one simple task: to pick up trays of bread coming off the conveyor belt, rotate them 90 degrees, and place them on a different belt, for the entire duration of my 12-hour overnight shift. It would have nearly doubled my pay, but I just couldn't do it. I put my little hat back on and went back to rolling burritos. Even in the darkest, most horrible, open-to-close days of my time at the burrito restaurant, I would console myself with the thought of that job and how much worse things could be. What's the biggest bullet you've ever dodged? Grandma got a flat tire, pulled over. As she was on the side fixing the tire, her car was hit and totaled. Right from her hands. She was actually okay. I used to roller skate as a kid outside my house down a hill and never wore any kind of protection. Suddenly, one day before I go out, my older brother tells me I can't leave unless I put on a helmet, which is weird since he's never cared before. Anyway, I do it, and that day, for the first time ever, I fell and landed on the back of my head so hard that the helmet cracked. That crack would have probably been my skull had I not worn it. Years ago, I was on a first meet for an internet date. We met at a bar and the bartender carded us. Even though we were both older, they were doing stings in the area, so he was carding every single person. Handed mine right over, but my date was a jerk about it. The bartender checked mine and handed it back to me. He checked his, and rather than handing it back to him, he placed it on the bar right in front of me. It had the stamp of an unspeakable act offender on it. The guy picked it up, looked at the bartender, looked at me, and then got up and walked out. I immediately Googled him. He was on the registry and had been in prison for the unspeakable act before. Lesson learned, always Google people. The bartender and I are still friends. I sold my bar and grill business in August 2019. I sold my 3 restaurants in February 2020 for way more than they were worth. Now 2 have closed post-COVID. This one just materialized yesterday, actually. About a year ago at my job, I was offered to switch from my current team, where I was established for a few years and had seniority, for a new department that had just started to kick off, write processes, basically start from square one. A lot more work for the same amount of pay. I figured, screw it, and went. Yesterday they announced that they just closed the physical HQ office for my old department, and everyone in that part of the company would have to either move to one of 14 random states that we can't pick, it's basically chosen by roulette wheel for where you're going, to a local office, or they're going to be fired on June 22. Thankfully, since I'm part of my new department, I wasn't included in that mandate. Phew. I was a teen driver not paying attention at an intersection at the crest of a hill with low visibility when the light turned green. The car behind me honked, and just as I was about to go, a truck barreled through the red light on the perpendicular road at decidedly ludicrous speed. If I'd been paying attention and gone when the light turned green, I very likely would have been T-boned to death. Closest call I've ever had. I would wager that if I were in the driver's seat, even though I would have survived, my undies, trousers, and the seat itself would have been decidedly rendered unusable once I'd realized what had happened. I was working in an amusement park during college. I used to come home on a Friday afternoon and usually pick up a Friday shift as well as a full weekend, during the month that the park was only open on weekends. I was a manager at my attraction. One particular Friday, I got home and was too exhausted to do a Friday shift, so I bagged it and decided to just work the Saturday and Sunday and be back at school on Monday. I got a call from a good friend and co-worker telling me that our attraction was in flames, there were casualties, and a couple of my friends and co-workers were missing. 7 people lost their lives. My co-worker, assistant manager, went back in and pulled people out to safety. He was okay. I was in shock for a few days. Had I done what I usually do, I would have been there in charge and I know I would have gone in to help. It could have been an entirely different situation. So yeah, I dodged a bullet, but a devastating event happened. I'll never know. To keep very true to the topic, I was out kayaking on a lake and several bullets whizzed by me. There was a distinct buzz, crack, buzz as it went by. I think some people were just out plinking in their backyard adjacent to the lake and didn't think a backstop was necessary. This also happened to me a few weeks later when I was paddling on a small stream. Bullets whizzed by above the bank, just over my head. I don't think anyone knew I was there at the time. Regardless, when you go out and shoot stuff, make sure there's a backstop for frick's sake. Also, I don't know how big the bullets were, so I'm unsure which was the biggest bullet I dodged. When I was 16, I used a fake ID to go out clubbing. The legal age in Ireland is 18, so I passed for it and did it all the time. One night I felt sick and decided to leave my friends and go home. I knew there was a taxi rank in a small alley somewhere and was looking for it when an older guy, 20s probably, offered to show me. The alley he brought me down was not the taxi rank. Once I realized, I tried to go back, but he pushed me against a wall and told me I wasn't going anywhere. I just remember not being able to scream. I just froze. It felt like forever, but probably only a few seconds later, some guys I went to school with just happened to walk down by the alley, also looking for taxis, and saw me. One of them yelled out my name, and then he realized the guy had his arm across the throat, and he went mental. The guy jumped the wall at the end of the alley, and I just burst into tears. My schoolmate took me home and made sure I was okay. I'm in my mid-30s now with 3 daughters, and I still shudder when I think about this. Driving to Phoenix from Utah for a job in January of 1989. My new boss told me if I wasn't there by 8 a.m. Monday morning, he'd give the job to someone else. It was 8 p.m. on Sunday evening when he told me that. By the time I got to Flagstaff, I was delirious and hallucinating. I hadn't slept in 2 days, I'd been partying. I pulled over for a nap at a rest area. So cold. I started the truck just to heat it up a little bit. The next thing I remember, I was lying in the bed of my truck, with a guy gently slapping my face. Some trucker watched me start the truck, 79 Ford, and slump over to sleep. He said he was worried because he could hear the exhaust leak as I sat there idling. Made a mental note of the time. An hour later, he checked on me and I was unconscious. So after pounding on the windows for a few minutes, he noticed the sliding window latch was busted, just like the one in his own 79 Ford. He pulled me out through the back window and saved me from carbon monoxide poisoning. Took me a week to shake off that headache. No, I didn't get the job. I didn't roll up to the job site until just before noon. The big boss wasn't cool about it. On a brightish note, one of the guys on another crew saw me begging for the job and thought I had moxie. He hired me for a dirtier, crappier job that I grew to loathe. But at least it wasn't a wasted trip and I didn't die. I matched with a guy on Tinder who played for the Atlanta Falcons. He was really charming and seemed nice. He asked me to fly down to Atlantic City for Memorial Day weekend, said he'd pay for everything, airfare, hotel, food, etc. But I'd never met him before and he refused to give me his phone number. I was uncomfortable flying to meet a stranger, so I told him no. 2 weeks later, he was on the news for kicking and killing his girlfriend's dog. What's with the Atlanta Falcons and dogs? I'm not even trying to be funny, like that's really messed up. I took my wife to an indoor shooting range in 2014. I'd been at this range many times and safety was always their top priority. They made you sit through a safety video, take a quiz, and get a temporary certification before they allowed you into the range. The place got really busy and their safety policy became less stringent as time went on. I noticed that the lane next to us that time had 3 people in it, already a violation of rules. 2 big guys and 1 tiny woman, probably in her 20s. They were handing her various firearms and laughing when she couldn't handle the recoil. Big violation there and incredibly irresponsible. This girl was muzzle sweeping everyone. Another huge violation. I got a bad feeling and told my wife to pack it up because we were leaving. As soon as we started walking away, bang! That girl had fired a round right where my wife was standing just a few seconds prior. I told the range officers that they needed to get in there and do something about those idiots and that we weren't coming back. I've only been to a range a few times since that happened and now I don't even go at all. Too many idiots. From the one range I used to frequent in my life, I can tell you that at the very first muzzle sweep you would be out and with a temporary ban, at the very least. Crazy stuff. I was out at the bar with my friends and feeling tired. When I said I was leaving to turn in early, they all good-naturedly gave me crap. That night they all got $1,500 tickets for public urination on their walk home from the bar. Not exactly life-changing, but not a small bullet either. 2005, my friend and I evacuated New Orleans 2 days before Hurricane Katrina and drove to Mississippi with the little money we had. We were trying to decide where to stay for the night, and it was between a mid-range hotel or a really cheap motel. Decided to spend a little more for the hotel. During the night, the eye of the storm came through Mississippi and flattened the roof of the motel that we'd decided against. My mom wasn't going to leave for Katrina. I told her I was going to take me and my little sister and hitchhike if she didn't pack the car and leave within the hour. My dad didn't leave and he ended up on the roof with our neighbor because our house got flooded. No way all of us would have survived. Katrina decimated my town. Everything 2 miles inland or less was destroyed. I was booked on Pan Am Flight 103, which went down over Lockerbie, Scotland. I didn't have a premonition or anything supernatural, I just decided to cancel my seat. Didn't think anything of it until the plane went down and my mother had written down my flight plan and reminded me. This was back in the day when you could cancel without a penalty up to a couple of days in advance. On any given day, we make decisions for no concrete reason, really. I just chose not to go that day, and we come to learn it was a good decision. I try not to evaluate my decision because I don't want to affect my future decisions by second-guessing or trying to work the odds. This is only one example of times that I've dodged a significant bullet. I stopped duck hunting with a guy because he would put his 12-gauge Remington 1100 on his shoulders with no thought to where the barrel was pointing. I'd tell him to point it the other way or I'd stop and move to the other side. But he'd shifted it around and it would end up pointing at my head when we were walking. I told him I wouldn't hunt with him anymore and he was really teed off at me and called me a fricking Nancy, and that there was no danger because the safety was on. A couple of weeks later, he told me he'd had an accidental discharge with the gun on his shoulder.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I was subletting an apartment in college and got zapped by the electric stove. Gave notice immediately and moved out with very clear reasons why I was moving out. That building burnt a few weeks later. A Dutch mate of mine living in Tasmania had to visit his sick mum in Amsterdam. Booking his flight home online, he said to his wife, "You know, I'm sick of flying Malaysian Airlines. The food is crap, the hosties are miserable, it'll cost more, but I'm booking with Singapore Airlines." So instead of dying on MH17, he was on a plane 40 k's ahead of it. I got chucked off a horse. I hit the ground so hard I felt my soul leave my body. Started to cough up blood and was having trouble breathing within 30 seconds. Rushed to the hospital and the doctors were running down the hallway with me on a backboard. Doctors running is always a bad sign. I was sure I was dying. Came to find out that I broke 2 bones in my back and collapsed a lung. Once I was more with it, a nurse handed me my helmet and said, "It's a good job you were wearing this." It had been cracked almost in half. If I hadn't been wearing that, it would have been my head, and I most certainly would be dead or permanently disabled. Wear your helmet, kids. A bus. I grew up in Bermuda, and since it's such a small island, cars are limited to 1 per family, and everyone drives mopeds. I was driving into town and came up to a red light behind a bus. As is tradition, I scooted around the bus to be in front of the line of traffic. Literally 2 seconds later, a second bus smashed into the back of the first bus at like 30 miles per hour. I would have been pancaked. Without question, 100% dead. I just sat on the side of the road for a bit and thought about my mortality. My only other Bermuda bus-based encounter was driving home from my first job in the rain. An oncoming bus in the opposite lane went through a massive puddle and sent what looked like a tidal wave of water right at me. It literally picked me and my little Yamaha V50 right up and swept us off the road into some grass. So I guess in the end it was me won, buses won.
I attempted to self-delete.
I ended up passing out in some bushes near the train station. Early the next morning, a girl I went to high school with, who I barely knew, saw me while she was boarding the train for a college interview early in the morning. She recognized me and told the conductor. He dismissed me as a junkie who just needed to sleep it off. She said, "I know him. He doesn't do substances or drink. Call 911 now." 3 days in a coma. I'm very grateful now. About 6 months after I left my ex, he got caught sending very inappropriate content to a 12-year-old. He was 34 at the time. I really needed a job, and the manager at my dispensary in my area offered me a spot. I said no, and 4 days later they were raided and everyone got arrested. I'm confused. Did they not have a license, or are the feds just raiding dispensaries because it's technically still illegal by federal law? Yes, the latter exactly. The narrator is very confused about this later one. You can have a licensed, commonplace sort of store that is in actual fact illegal under the laws of the country you live in. Very strange. My ex-girlfriend moved out of my house a day before the first lockdown in Spain. She had previously pulled a knife on me. I had 2 job offers in different states at the same time. The one I didn't take was offering more money, but I just didn't gel with the guy who'd be my boss and really liked the guy who would be my boss at the lower offer. The better offer was in a state I'd always wanted to live in for a company I admired, but something felt off, so I went with the lower offer. I ended up meeting my wife in the city of the lower offer. Meanwhile, the company that had given me the higher offer abruptly closed and laid off their entire staff with no severance. So if I'd taken that, I would have been stuck on the other side of the country with no job and no money. I got on an intercity bus and almost sat in the middle, but then moved and sat at the back. The bus later collided with a truck and opened up like a tin can. If I'd sat where I originally intended, I would have been killed. Was driving on a freeway in the right lane when there was a sudden traffic jam ahead. I slammed on my brakes and was about to swerve onto the shoulder when I noticed that I wasn't sure the semi behind me could stop, and I didn't know how long we actually had a shoulder, construction was happening at the time, made the decision to rear-end the car in front of me to stay off the shoulder. The truck went onto the shoulder, brakes squealing, and finally managed to stop when the back tires of their trailer were level with me. Good thing we weren't in a center lane and that we happened to have a shoulder at that moment. As a bonus, I stopped in time and didn't hit the car in front of me after all, though I would have happily taken that hit and hopefully only would have shook up the people in front of me, in place of literally being hit by a truck. I once convinced 2 police officers that I was the one on my fake ID. It was my older brother's ID 22. I was 19 at the time. Me and my roommate were checking out the liquor store and the cashier said my roommate's ID was fake. It was an actual fake with his photo, so the cashier quickly told the other very large worker to lock and barricade the door immediately. They called the cops and practically held us hostage until the cops arrived. My roommate ended up getting a ticket for his literal fake ID, and I convinced the cops I was my brother. We look like brothers, but we definitely don't look like the same person. What sold them was when one of the 2 cops asked me to name some streets. We were in our college town about 2 hours away from where my home address was. I recited the address on the ID because it was my childhood home, and the cop said, "No, name some streets around this address." He apparently grew up and went to high school in that district, so he was testing me. I named like 5 or 10 road names in that area, and I was good to go. I have no idea how I didn't panic or act flustered. I'd been pulled over for going like 9 miles an hour over the speed limit before, and I'd been freaking out that time. But this day, I had ice in my veins for some reason. A few months ago, I was driving on the I-80 at night when out of nowhere, the biggest buck I'd ever seen was in the middle of my lane. I did exactly what you're not supposed to do and swerved, and thankfully managed to keep the rear of my car content with it. I literally shaved that buck's butt. My mirror was folded in. I know you're not supposed to swerve, but I drive a tiny little thing and that buck's body would have gone through my windshield and into mine and my wife's face at 70 miles per hour. My friend and I were in a bar and she was talking to a guy she met on Tinder. When she turned around, I saw him put something into her beer. I walked up, pretended to stumble, and knocked it out of her hand and apologized. Told her I'd buy her next beer, and when we walked over to the bar, I told her what he did. We left right after. Decided to grab a case of beer and play Mario Kart that night instead. I only tagged along because she asked me to, which I'm always perfectly happy to do. Glad that I did. My first ever boyfriend dated me when I was 14 and he was 16. We only dated for 1 week before he took me into the woods and forced me to kiss him. I started to feel icky and broke it off that same day. 5 years later, and I've found out that he's now in prison for inappropriate behavior with minors. A year ago, almost to the day, I was offered a new job. It was exactly what I was looking for, and I was really excited. They told me they would email the contract, but after a week I hadn't heard anything. After a lot of chasing, they told me they'd changed the structure of the organization, so the position wasn't available. I have a month's notice for my current job, and if I'd taken the new job, my notice period would have been after the cutoff date for furlough in the UK. The new job was in an industry that collapsed through the pandemic, and the industry I work in now has boomed. If I'd received that email, I probably would have been close to bankruptcy now. Phew, well, there were worse things during the pandemic than a dependable job, even if it wasn't one that thrilled you. Lucky miss. I hit a coyote on I-80 going about 80 miles per hour in the middle of the night in Indiana, coming back to Michigan once. I hit the thing dead on and it somehow went under my car and scampered off and lived. The only damage was my bumper was a little bit cracked, which I didn't care about because the bumper was already a bit messed up, so it was no big deal. There was literally fur all over the bumper. I got lucky. Had it been a buck that I'd hit dead on, there's no way my little old Subaru, myself, my girlfriend, or my sister would have been uninjured. I drove much slower and with much more caution after that. That time where I didn't go along for a ride when a friend of mine was running Green Herb, years ago, back when it was more illegal. I was bored and unemployed at the time, and passed on this trip because I had to go to a job interview to be a zombie for Halloween festivities at an amusement park. I got the job, my friend got arrested, and did 30 days in jail. Finishing up my paper route when I was a kid. Walking home on the sidewalk next to a busy road with my sister on the inside, me dragging our little buggy on the outside. Middle of winter, the car jumps the curb and takes out our buggy. Neither of us knew what the heck had just happened other than the ungodly scraping sound and that our buggy was gone. We found out later that the driver saw us run home scared and brought back our buggy, which was utterly destroyed in a crumpled heap. I was pulling the cart and my hand was on it, so I'm not sure how I avoided eating chrome that day. Not a single scratch on me. I still think about it regularly and it's been over 30 years. I found an explosive device in a National Guard training area when I was 14. It had a little pull string and a metal plate to attach it to a tree. I held the thing in my hand and almost pulled the string, but decided to attach it to the tree instead and put it on a longer pull string. I pulled the string and it blew a 5-inch hole in the tree. The explosion was so loud the police came and it made the local news. They didn't catch me. I would have at least lost one hand, maybe both, or worse. What's the worst example of rich people problems that you've seen? My rich friend has had to respray his car multiple times because a peacock on his lawn keeps seeing his reflection in it and attacks it like crazy. I was pumping gas in a rather dicey neighborhood at a cheap gas station, and this older woman pulls up in her Bentley. She pulls up on the pump ahead of me and cracks her window slightly and asks for me to help. I ask her what she needs. She asks me to pump her gas because she was too scared to do it herself. I ask her what type of gas she wanted and she said the cheapest. I asked her if she was sure, with such a high-end car, did she really want to put in budget gas. She said it didn't matter, since she could easily afford any new car she wanted. So I insert my debit card and she hands me a $100 bill and says keep the change. I fill up her tank and my own 12-gallon Honda Civic tank, and I made about $30 from the change. I finish up at the gas station and jump on the freeway to see my girlfriend at the time, and I'm going the same way as this woman. I get off at the same exit as this woman. She's making a right to an affluent area, and I'm making a left off the exit to a less nice area. She rolls down the window and yells at me, "I thought you were following me." "I'm sorry, where are you heading?" I told her which neighborhood I was going to, and she gave an awkward smile and says, "I'll tell the dispatcher that you're not following me, and that I'm not fearing for my life." The B-word called the cops on me thinking I was following her to rob her. I ended up getting to my destination, chill with my girlfriend, and I didn't get pulled over. I work at a hotel, and whenever I valet a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley, I just think of this old lady. Stuff like this is why if I ever do get to a level of income that could be considered rich, why I won't flaunt it. I wouldn't want to be a paranoid aging dragon of a person clutching my pearls at every turn, while simultaneously trying to show off the same pearls. I knew someone who traded in his Porsche and brought a new one every year. His parents were wealthy and died when he was in his teens, and left him a multi-million-dollar trust fund. What was sad was that he felt like he couldn't pick up women without flashing his cash and expensive sports car, but he would dump them all in a couple of weeks because they were only into me for my money. The loneliest guy I've ever met. And he's not Batman, by the way. His parents died in a car accident and his butler's name is Davin, not Alfred. My wife is a flight attendant. Wife: what would you like to drink? Passenger: I'll have a water. Wait, where is your water from? My wife: what? What country is your water from? I only drink water from France. Well, I knew the topic would be full of stuff that made me angry, and after this batch, I'm already fuming. Oh well, on to more of these fools with more greenbacks than sense. I went to a fine dining restaurant a few years back that offered us a chance to look at their water menu before dinner. My wife immediately said no because obviously we're not ordering fancy water off the water menu. I'm still kind of disappointed that we didn't at least look at it. That would have been hilarious. Complaining about your allowance from your daddy at age 30, which is the rough equivalent of 2 average salaries. Or complaining that your dad brought you a used car instead of a new one when you were 21, and he only spent $10K. The girl could have been thankful that he even bought her a car. I knew people who brought a new yacht because the wife didn't like the beds on the old one. I knew some who brought a new yacht because the old one had ants and they couldn't find the hive. I mean, this one's a little more understandable. F ants. I would have set the thing on fire. Girl in college lost $6,000 in traveler's checks, but doing the paperwork to have them replaced was too much bother for her. I had friends who had to break their phone. It was the latest iPhone model and perfectly working, but there was a newer one coming out that they wanted, and their parents would only buy it if their other one was broken. I had to endure these kids throwing their phones against walls and being frustrated that their phone wasn't broken yet. My friend wants to marry her boyfriend. They're going to school in America but are both from China, her from Beijing and him from near Shanghai. They both pay $60,000 a year to go to high school here. However, she can't marry him because his family only owns 2 houses in Hangzhou, whereas hers owns 7 in Beijing. My rich aunt doesn't let us park in front of her house because it makes her mansion look bad. When I was in high school, my family was pretty poor and I had a fairly rich friend. My single dad spent years saving up for us to go to Disneyland. We finally went when I was 16. Fast forward a year, my friend is going to Disneyland for Halloween break. Her dad told her to invite 2 friends, so she invited me and another girl. I was freaking stoked, but she kept saying, I don't know, it's probably going to be boring. My grandma takes me to Disneyland like every break. And when we got there, all she wanted to do was sit on benches and text. All of the rides were boring, and she had already been on them dozens of times. It ended up being pretty boring for me because I didn't want to go on the rides without her. A young girl, about 5 years of age, was getting ready to go into New York City to visit her grandmother, New Jersey suburbs. She was at her aunt's house and didn't have a pair of shoes that she liked. She called her chauffeur, told him which pair of shoes she wanted, and the guy got the shoes and drove some 20 miles to deliver them. And she told him he got the wrong ones and he was an idiot. No one in the family thought this was inappropriate. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how a rich kid becomes a spoiled, entitled brat. Watch The Queen of Versailles. It's riveting and it's all about rich people problems. And it's not about Marie Antoinette, as the title would suggest. It's a documentary about a ridiculously rich family before and during the Great Recession, and the effect that the housing crisis had on them. A person I know only drinks Evian or Voss water because he's allergic to tap water. I'm not ripping on him for not drinking tap, but for only drinking what is regarded as luxury water. He lives in a wealthy neighborhood in America. I just find it crazy that he'll only drink certain kinds of bottled water. My cousin's best friend yelled at her dad and said she hated him because he wouldn't take her to London to buy a dress, even though the exact same dress was available from the exact same store back home. She needed the one from London because they just make things better over there. I know someone who has to buy all the surrounding plots of land to get some privacy. Of all the things on here, this makes the most sense to me. You really can't put a price on privacy. Sure you can. It's the cost of all the land surrounding you. Local billionaire Paul Allen wanted to put a helicopter landing pad on his waterfront compound on Mercer Island several years ago, but the city said no. So Paul Allen had a custom-made helicopter landing pad ship built that motors out 100 yards into the lake beyond the city's jurisdiction whenever Paul wants to take off or land via helicopter. Zoning regulations are for normies, apparently. Well, as petty and obnoxious as that is, I've looked up Mercer Island, and at least the result is just one obscenely rich person making other rich people angry. I hope the engineers who designed that custom boat charged him a fortune. A super yacht docked in Italy at high-end marina. Owners wanted the bottled Perrier water for a party they were having in a day or two. They wanted the marina to supply them with a pallet of said water. The marina said it was against policy for them to get a pallet of water to their boat. So these people got a private jet from America to fly in pallet of said water and got it dropped to the boat. The price was about $28,000 as far as I remember, but even that amount seems a bit low for that. I had to help a girl pay her tuition bill, and she was upset because she genuinely thought the process of putting in credit card information was too difficult. Yeah, she took her dad's credit card and paid $20,000 for the semester like it was buying a stick of gum. I'd put my tuition on my parents' credit card if I could. $40,000 of purchases would give them a nice pile of points, and I'd obviously transfer them the money to pay it off. Drove a client's wife home from the airport after the big snowstorm in Boston this year. I felt so bad as she told me, "Oh, Roger is so sad. They could only clear the snow from in front of 2 of our garage bays. He wanted to take his BMW out, but he's stuck driving my Mercedes for another week." Oh, well, how does he go on? I went on an amazing trip to the southern US with my girlfriend at the time during the summer, and she had an uncle who was very rich, and she was used to all his wealth. I wasn't. I couldn't believe that we got to do all of these amazing things that we did. Money was just not an object or something you had to worry about. The third day of the trip, I was getting aboard his yacht. He owned the largest one in the club, and it was incredible. Glass stairs, stone walls, and dark, beautiful wood. We all sat down near the back at a table, and his wife freaked out. She yelled, "Where are the mats?" Apparently, there were supposed to be mats set down on the table before the giant glass bowl of chips and freshly made guacamole could be placed in front of us. She was really mad and almost embarrassed. I've never been so weirded out by someone's anger. I couldn't believe it was such a problem to her. I said to myself, "It's fine. Seriously, I could walk in there and grab them in 4 seconds." I'll never forget, and I learned that extremely rich people don't have the same kind of problems that regular people do. I was once friends with a Chinese girl whose family net worth appeared to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. She told me a story about her rich uncle who owned a super yacht and loved to travel around the world. Apparently, his favorite thing to do was pull up into a port and bathe in the stares of everyone admiring his yacht, since it was always the biggest one. Well, one day he goes somewhere, say the Bahamas, and he pulls into the port, and he isn't getting the usual attention since someone else happens to have a bigger yacht than him for once. This girl said it ruined his whole weekend. He was in a terrible mood and couldn't enjoy anything. I was speechless. Also, this girl is the same one that is constantly complaining about how all her friends aren't that smart or nice, and how she doesn't know what to do with all her free time and money. The girl taught me something. Apparently there are a lot of rich people that have so little problems, they just make them up. And yeah, I've seen her Facebook pictures, met her friends, seen her cars, and talked to her for long enough to confirm that she probably isn't lying.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a former friend who went into despair because Hurricane Sandy flooded her living room of her childhood home. Told everyone she was homeless now, and she knew what it felt like to lose everything the way her Jewish ancestors did in World War II. Thing is, she owned another apartment that she lived in on the island. Her parents owned several more vacation homes up and down the coast. They were a little inconvenienced, maybe, but far from homeless. I worked for a girl who had a speaker go out in her Ferrari, and she refused to drive any further under these circumstances, so she pulled over to wait for one of her house staff to bring her Porsche. True story. I was invited to a graduation party hosted by a very wealthy couple whose daughter had just graduated from Yale. Her father came out in front of the guests, displaying his Rolex and Cartier watches, asking which one of the 2 expensive watches the group thought would be the more appropriate for the occasion. Everyone just looked at each other silently, not quite sure what to say. Back when the recession hit, one of my very best friend's family was very distraught because they had to sell one of their 3 private jets. I occasionally hung out with a kid whose dad was super rich. He would just ask for money and get it.
He tried to use an ATM and had no idea how to, so he asked me or someone else to get the money for him. It was so confusing for him. Most simple tasks were because he was raised to not lift a finger. I knew a guy who had a friend or roommate like that. He recognized the opportunity and had kind of turned himself into an informal personal assistant. He took care of all the details of making things happen for his rich kid friend, while skimming a reasonable living for himself. The way he described it, it didn't sound like he was doing anything unethical. He was just maximizing his friend's enjoyment of spending his allowance, part of the cost of which was paying for his time managing the details of setting up parties, trip planning, researching products, and other things. Honestly, back in the day I'd kind of thought about whether I would enjoy being a butler-type figure for someone rich. I can see the charm in the lifestyle. I enjoy looking after people and cooking and being useful. But then I realized that the kind of client or duties you end up with would really be such a roll of the dice, with some potentially unpleasant results in terms of people and workload. I worked for a non-profit that helped extremely low-income women start their own business. These women would give up food to scrape together enough money to join our program. One of our EDs said she wished she could relate to the clients more, but she's never been poor. She owned 2 homes in one of the most expensive zip codes in the US. Also, another woman, who I really did respect but I didn't always agree with, believed people chose to be in poverty. We would debate for days about that statement. I realized working there that people who run advocacy programs for poverty have no idea what it's really like to be in it. This is a problem because policy and lawmakers are looking at these institutions for advisement on drafting new social safety nets and welfare programs to help the working poor, and they just have no clue. It motivated me to go back and get a master's degree to fight this. I grew up super poor and can speak from experience, not theory. My boss complained to me recently that they owned too much land and too many properties. She's like, "Don't own too much land and properties. It's just a hassle." A kid I know claimed he wasn't rich, saying, "I don't get to pilot my helicopters as much anymore." The guy sitting next to him, when prompted to define an income bracket for middle class, couldn't answer. He eventually arrived at a $700,000 annual income as a rough estimate. I live in the part of my country where internet is really expensive. 16 megabit per second plans are considered plans for extremely rich people. One fine day, one of my friends threw a fit at his dad because he was getting 15 megabits per second instead of 16 for like an hour. I mean, holy crap, I live on a 2 megabit per second connection, which turns into 512 kilobits per second connection after a 30 gigabyte data cap. I just moved to a 50 megabit per second from a 2 megabit per second. Life is not the same anymore. I saw a guy on Instagram who couldn't wait for a car he custom ordered, so he went and bought one from the dealer while he waited for the custom one. My old boss did this. He ordered a brand new BMW M5, and while he was waiting for it to be delivered, he brought a nearly new Maserati Quattroporte. When the BMW arrived, he had no more need for the Maserati, so he sold it, and bought a Bentley Flying Spur with the money. This is the same guy who brought a Ferrari 575 Super America and drives it around like it's an everyday car. I don't know if this is a problem exactly, but I was on the tube in South London and a bunch of young banker types in fancy suits were there with their equally well-dressed arm candy girlfriends. And one guy was like, "Everyone keeps telling me to get a Bentley, but I'm more of a Lambo man." This was at a point in my life where I was living off $1 boxes of pasta from Tesco, so it was a bit of a surreal moment. Oh man, I work at a place where I interact with a lot of rich people. I've come into contact with lots of rich people problems. Here's a few that I've witnessed. I overheard some ladies saying, "Oh, they can be expensive, but buying nicer cars like Porsches and Mercedes is worth it. We had a GMC once and we only drove it for like 4 years, and we had to have something fixed, and it just felt old." Also, a mum saying, "I took her to a little friend's birthday party, but I didn't know what to bring. Do kids like Coach bags still? I have no idea." Some other ladies, "So what are you ladies doing this summer?" "Oh, nothing. Last summer was crazy, so this summer we're taking it easy. We're spending 1 week in London and 1 week in Hawaii. But other than that, nothing. We're relaxing this summer." And finally, a 14-year-old kid who looked despondent, and when I asked him what was wrong, he replied, "We're going to Paris again. I hate it. It's so boring." There are many more, but those are a few. My London friend is having a baby, and she's upset that Jimmy Choo doesn't make diaper bags. My mum works at a Baptist church. The pastor makes somewhere between $90 to $100K a year with all of his insurance and gas paid. He is rich as heck, owns 2 homes and has a ton of money on top of his salary. When he takes mission trips and pastor conventions, he holds offerings to pay for his airfare and everything else. Meanwhile, other people that come with him pay their own way. This is a church full of poor and retired people. Well, I'd say that's something you don't hear about all the time, but I'm pretty sure that half the ministers of the megachurches in America are obscenely wealthy and see no fault in wringing out every last cent from their congregation on a regular basis. My buddy had to rent a cabin for his ski trip because his mum just had theirs redecorated for a magazine spread, which hadn't been photographed yet. The same guy couldn't remember which company card he'd put his $4,000 adult nightclub tab on. He really needs an assistant to help keep track of these things. He's interviewed some, but he hasn't hired one yet. Last week was rough. To all those who say they'd want to be his assistant, unless you're a masochist, no, you wouldn't. For every time you'd get to go to that club with the bunch of absolute D-bags he's entertaining, you will have picked his kid up from preschool about 20 times, or double-checked a few reams of paperwork, or stayed on the phone trying to get a hold of some bureaucrat or another, or any of a few other dozen boring tasks that you'll probably have to do 3 at a time. And on top of that, you'd have to deal with King Butthole as your boss. No, not my friend. Inexplicably, he's turned out to be a really good person. No, your real boss would be his dad, who tends to treat everyone that doesn't have at least his net worth worse than garbage, especially his employees. You'd get blamed for every little problem until you're losing your crap and quit, and they'll just pick the next ambitious MBA they could find to take your place. I seriously wouldn't wish that job on my worst enemy. You might think you're tough-minded and could handle it, but you'd be the type that gets broken the hardest. And it would be harder than it should be because my friend is such a nice guy, and you'd know that if it weren't for you, he'd bear the brunt of it, and those times that are good are really, really good. I'm a nanny for a rich family. A few examples I have. When I get paid, in cash, my boss says, "Oh dear, now I'm going to have to go all the way to the bank to get more cash." Not wanting to go to the bank isn't the annoying rich thing. It was an annoying rich thing because she had $500 still in her wallet, and it was annoying that she was complaining it wasn't enough money to have in her wallet. When they travel, they prefer 2-bedroom suites. One time, they could only get 1 bedroom, and they said, "Well, this just ruins the whole trip." My car got broken into, and I mentioned it felt so awful to drive it knowing someone had been in it. His idea of emphasizing, "Oh, that happened to me. I had to buy a new one." The movie This Is 40. "Honey, we're in debt and both our businesses are operating at a loss." "Okay, let's go spend the night at a nearby luxury hotel and order room service." I was at a marina in the Bahamas to do laundry, stock up on water and supplies with my 25-year-old beta sailboat, and I was walking the dog when I met a guy walking his dog. He was off a 140-foot boat with a substantial, crisply uniformed crew and could not stop complaining how the Bahamas government had charged him $250 for a 6-month cruising permit and fishing license. The same rate I paid, by the way. He went on and on, how they don't have lighthouses or buoys, etc. He had to be paying that much to dock for the night, let alone crew and fuel. Boat probably cost $10 million or more. I ended the conversation by saying that I'd paid more than that for the bottom paint which kept barnacles from growing on my hull. A friend of mine who has considerably more money than me, although admittedly that doesn't take much, was always asking me to come on expensive trips with her, and I had to keep turning her down because I couldn't afford it. She'd say stuff like, "Oh, go on, treat yourself," and I'd have to explain that I literally don't have the money. It's not that I can't or don't want to spend it, it doesn't exist in my bank account. I eventually had to sit her down and explain that I'm poor. I told her about how I couldn't afford to buy much food, so during work days I'd live off the fruit tree and coffee at the office. I showed her how all of my shoes have holes, so I'd line them with plastic bags to stop the rain getting in. I explained that I cut my own hair and washed my own clothes in water with no detergent. I pointed out that I'd long ago put all of my possessions that had any sort of value on eBay. I wasn't trying to get sympathy, I was only trying to explain why for the 100th time I was turning down her invitation for shopping trips or girls' nights or weekends away. She looked at me and nodded in understanding. I know what you mean. Things have been really tight for me recently. I'm so skint at the moment that I've had to cut my weekly manicure and spa days down to just 2 a month.
What insane ways has the universe indicated that it could kill you at any time? I once had an elevator drop more than 10 floors rapidly before deciding to work properly. Let me explain. This happened to me at the Land Title building in downtown Philadelphia. I was visiting a friend on the 20th floor, and around floor 15, the elevator suddenly makes a fatigued groaning sound before dropping. Fast. Scared the ever-loving pee out of me as I rocketed down to floor 5 before it slowed, stopped, and reversed course back up again. I noped. I hit the button for every floor so the fricking thing would just let me off, and I walked down the stairs and out of the building. I never did get to visit my friend. What random horrors has the universe subjected you to, only to say, "Haha, got ya," right before the point of no return? And don't tell me this didn't or can't happen. It happened. When I was 10, I was on a helicopter visiting an island off the south coast of England. Everything was going smoothly until the helicopter turns on its side and proceeds to nosedive for a good 10 seconds toward the sea. Needless to say, this had everyone screaming and scared crapless. The helicopter suddenly levels off and the pilot comes onto the PA system and says, "Oh, sorry people, I could have sworn I spotted a dolphin. Won't happen again." I now hate helicopters. I think I've played Battlefield 3 with this guy. I'm a private pilot. One time I was nearing the airport to land. I hit the switch to put the landing gear down and only 2 lights showed up, indicating that the 2 main gears were down, but the nose gear was not coming down as well. So, if all else fails, I'd either have to raise the gear and do a belly landing, or do a landing with only 2 gears, which would be even more dangerous. But first I went back away from the airport to try and work out the problem if possible. I tried raising the gear and re-lowering it. Same problem. 2 lights but no nose gear. Because the gear comes down from the force of gravity, I tried pulling a few Gs to force it down. Nothing. I tried wiggling the rudder since the turning mechanism is connected to the nose gear. Nothing. Maybe a few more Gs? Nothing. Finally, I remembered what the instructor had told me in passing when I was getting checked out in this particular aircraft. The lights for the gear are interchangeable, so that if one is burnt out, you can switch them around. So I went to switch them just in case the nose gear light was burnt out. As soon as I touched the light to change it, it came on. Whew. In the end, the light wasn't all the way into the socket, and that's what the problem was. I did a low pass over the tower so they could visually check that the gear was down just to be sure. I landed successfully in the end. In conclusion, landing gear wouldn't come down on my plane. Turned out that the light showing the gear's position was faulty, and I discovered it as I was at the end of my options before deciding on an emergency gear-up landing. I have a feeling that anyone who's entertaining ideas of getting their pilot's license is probably going to get a good brief of things that might put them off that particular vocation here. It's definitely not something for the light-hearted. I once studied abroad in Cyprus, and during Thanksgiving break I decided to go to Spain for the week. No one else wanted to go, so I went alone. It was incredible. I saw Madrid, Toledo, Sevilla, Granada, and Barcelona, in that order. I was supposed to take a bus back to Madrid to catch my flight back to Cyprus the next day. When I got to the bus station with all of my luggage, to take the last bus of the night around midnight, I noticed my wallet had been stolen. I had it when I got on the subway, so between getting on the subway and 10 minutes later when I got off and walked to the bus station, someone had taken it from me. My cash, debit card, and credit card were all stolen. I had no way of making purchases. My prepaid phone was out of minutes. I was effectively homeless in a foreign country. I went into the nearest bar where I told the bartender my story. He drove me back to his place after his shift ended at 3 a.m. He looked up the next available train and gave me €150 to pay for said train, subway tickets, and food. He drove me to the train station, I got on the train and made my flight the next day. I've since wired him back his money. If it weren't for his kindness, I'd be living on the street in Barcelona begging for change. How about the next time this happens, if you don't find a nice bartender, you go to the embassy before panhandling? I was studying abroad on a cruise ship, semester at sea program, and crossing the Pacific in the middle of winter. Spent about a week pitching and rolling on 30 to 40 foot high waves. It wasn't uncommon to pitch 45 degrees to the right, only to get tossed back 45 degrees to the left. At one point, we got caught between 2 bad storms and hit with a rogue wave. It was over 80 feet high and crashed out the windows on the bridge and caused some electrical issues that stopped our engines. Tremendous damage to the rest of the ship. I was sleeping at the time and my bed ripped out of the wall. We prepared to abandon ship into lifeboats, and I knew that we were all dead if we did that, as the Coast Guard was about a day out and there was no way the lifeboats would survive the rough waters. Literally, as we're getting ready to go out on deck and board the lifeboats, one of the engines starts working again and we don't have to evacuate.
We literally zigzagged our way to Hawaii and spent 2 weeks chilling while the boat was repaired. I was once young and kind of a moron. My friends and I loved to play in construction sites. Many of the neighborhoods in the area I grew up in were just being developed. Anyway, so we're messing around and we see these dump trucks dumping lots of black dirt, topsoil for lawns. So we're playing on the dirt piles, being little monsters, when a truck backs up and dumps a full truckload of dirt right on me. Even as a little nerd, I understood the immediate, overpowering, screaming urge to get the frick out now. I was running, scrambling, falling on this moving dirt pile, trying to reach the edge before it buried me completely. Which it did. I thought the classic line, "Oh, this is how I die. Weird." Just my hand was sticking out when the dirt stopped pouring. I immediately felt my friend's hands clawing the dirt away, and it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like eternity. I now understand the reason why people get trampled and whatnot in disasters. I don't like to think about it, but I probably would have pushed my own mother out of the way. I was so overcome with a singular thought: survive. When I was about 15, I took a trip to Vermont with my grandparents and my similarly aged cousin. We decided to go to one of those scenic overlooks that's nearby. It turns out to be a 50-foot-tall waterfall. Scenic overlooks not really being our thing, my cousin and I decided to ditch the geezers and climb around behind the fall and check out the view from the top. We make it up there, grab onto a tree, and waved our arms madly to catch the attention of the old folks. At the same time they glance up, my cousin slips towards the falls. I grab him, but end up losing my footing and falling into the water myself. As the rushing water carries me towards what I assume to be our imminent death, my right foot gets caught between a couple of larger rocks and the water pushes me upright. I find myself standing not 15 feet from the edge of the falls, grandparents in plain sight, and I start yelling at them to take a picture. At that point, I was almost literally crapping my pants. I don't know if anyone else has seen their grandmother screaming in utter terror, but I honestly hope not. My cousin pulled me out with a large branch a few moments later, and we were in serious crap. After the crisis-averted stage, we joined my grandparents on the wooden overlook. Clearly visible from that side of the falls was a giant sign on which all of the names of the people who had died from falling off said waterfall were printed. In conclusion, almost fell off a waterfall, but my leg got caught and saved me. I took a mastodonic bowel movement at a girlfriend's parents' house, and after flushing, as the water level rose and rose and rose, I looked frantically for a plunger. Her family must have been small, delicate poopers, because there was not a plunger to be found. The water level got right to the tip-top and stopped. Fortunately, there was a wire hanger on a hook on the wall. I fashioned it into a makeshift plumbing snake and I rooted out the clog. I rinsed the business end in the sink and reassembled the wire hanger as best as I could. Pulled up my pants, washed my hands, and a spritz of Febreze to kill the stench. Crisis averted. I can't help but notice that the stakes in this last one weren't quite as high as some of the others, but I do recognize the terror of doing this kind of thing in a high-pressure social situation, and I appreciate that it probably felt like a life-threatening situation at the time. I once fell through the ice when I was around 11 years old and I didn't know how to swim. I flailed around wildly and started screaming at the top of my lungs. Then I noticed that the water was only about chest high. Still, it was a fricking cold walk home. I'm surprised I didn't get hypothermia. About 10 years ago, I went for a routine clinic screening because I'm responsible and stuff. The doctor comes out with that horrible bad news face that they all seem to get and just stands in front of me for a minute, clearing his throat and looking uncomfortable. He starts to say something twice while looking at the chart. I'm afraid that, well, it isn't good. He clasps the chart in front of him and appears ready to say something. I glance at it quickly and make out the words transmitted and disease a few times. Suddenly, a nurse kind of jogs out of the office, takes the chart from the doctor and hands him another one, gives me a smile and then walks back inside. The doctor looks at the new chart, grins like a kid given the day off school and says cheerily, "Well, looks like you're all clean." A friend of mine and I were kayaking in the Gulf of Mexico, and I thought we were about to be eaten by sharks. We saw like 6 dorsal fins approaching, and it wasn't until they were about 10 feet away that we realized they were dolphins. You weren't out of the woods. Dolphins love to play, except play for a 600-pound lump of high-speed, ocean-going muscle is not the sort of thing your bones will take much of. You're all, "Look at me, I'm a helpless sack of bones who can't swim with skinny, brittle appendages." And the dolphin is like, "Aw, sweet, bro, let's do flips.
I'll totally throw ya, since I weigh 4 times as much and I don't really have a mental concept of broken arm on account of not really having arms.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was once driven off the highway by a woman driving a minivan and simultaneously doing her makeup. I drove for a while in the grassy median zone before being able to jerk back onto the highway. When I looked at the lady again, she looked sad and apologetic, sort of like a puppy when it knows it's chewed on your favorite sandals. Doesn't change the fact that she almost killed me, of course. I had a stroke at the age of 22 in September, but no permanent damage. Real funny, universe. I've got 2. I was trapped on an escalator for 10 minutes one time between 2 floors. I thought I wasn't going to make it. The second one was when I was on an overnight flight coming home. Not many people, and an off-duty flight attendant was in the window seat, asleep. We're on final approach and over the end of the runway when the plane suddenly rolls what feels like 90 degrees. I guess it couldn't have been that steep, but the overhead luggage racks pop open and some loose bags go flying, and before anyone can even scream, the place rolls back level and lands. Maybe 10 seconds tops. The flight attendant wakes up and looks around and we make eye contact and I swear she says, "New pilot." I was totally stunned and pretty sure I peed my pants. Taking a trip through the mountains with the wife, now my ex-wife, in the biggest piece of crap car we'd ever owned. We were about 4 hours from home, going through a small town, when the brakes fail. Thankfully, the car was a 5-speed manual, so I start shifting down to slow down. I spotted an auto parts store while I was coasting, judged it just right and pulled in and parked using the building to finally stop the car. It was a very gentle tap. I then proceeded to jack the rear of the car up and investigate. The rear brakes were completely shot, including the wheel cylinders. Went into the store, bought what I needed for repairs, new brake shoes, cylinder rebuild kits, and some brake fluid. I then proceeded to do a brake job on my car with nothing more than a Leatherman and a full-size, flat-tip screwdriver. This was a mum-and-pup parts store, no loaner tools. I was back on the road within the hour. I guess this was more of a "frick you, universe" story. Years ago, I was taking a break from kayaking, swimming in a river with a bunch of people all around me. I was next to a big pipe running under the water, actually called pipeline. Still not sure the exact reason for the pipe, but I was slowly being pulled to the left. Not thinking of it much, I let it pull me when all of a sudden I'm completely submerged, being sucked down into it. But a random metal rod jabbed into my chest. I hung on to it for dear life with one hand and with the other hand reached out of the pipe to feel around, and I actually feel a handle to pull myself out. When I got out and sat on top of the pipe, I looked around and noticed that everything was crystal clear, and no one had even noticed that I'd almost died right then. Quite the thrill. In Iraq, an IED had gone off on the lead vehicle of the convoy. Once the medevac was called in, another Marine and I went to check the kill zone and the area around the LZ. After a few minutes of looking for wires or detonators, I realized I was standing on a sandbag in the median road. I'd walked on about 7 other sandbags. It was the remains of the IED that had hit the lead vehicle. It was a daisy chain where only one went off. I was walking on them. That was a real pucker factor. The only thing I can think of is a 5.7 earthquake in a building rated for 6. For some reason, I just pictured all buildings having an official rating, and if a quake goes over that rating, the building disintegrates immediately. I have no idea why I find the idea amusing. When I was 16, I started taking birth control pills. A month later, right before my spring break, my left hand started to turn purple and got incredibly painful. At the hospital, after many tests, they found I had a blood clot from damn birth control. They perform an angiogram to search for any more clots. In the process, they discover a freak genetic deformity. I had extra rib bones growing off my spine, and they were pushing on my main artery under my clavicle, resulting in 2 aneurysms, one on each side. After a handful of surgeries, discarding rib bones and removing the aneurysms, they tell me I'm lucky to be alive. The best spring break ever. In short, taking birth control saved my life. I know many people who would echo the same sentiment, but for very different reasons, so congratulations. I hope you found a control method that worked for you. Coming back home from Iraq after my second tour, we stopped in Newfoundland in January. Blizzard-like conditions, we're taking off. and as soon as we get off the ground, the plane falls back onto the runway. The pilot comes on over the net and says, "Well, that was a little weird. We're gonna try and pull off and make sure that everything is okay." Rev up the engines, and then went around for another try. I figured after a 16-month tour, surviving multiple IED attacks, countless firefights, this is where I die, in Canada. Obviously, I made it back okay. But still, flying scares me. One time the brakes went out in a 15-year-old used car I used to own. Of course I was speeding and the light turned yellow. I hit the brakes and they didn't work, but then they locked up. I did a massive 180-degree going all the way across the intersection, coming to a complete stop perpendicular to a car, staring the driver in the face. I laughed, turned around and drove slowly the rest of the way home. I have one. I got stranded in the Salt Lake Airport once. I was looking at a 23-hour wait for my flight home to Boston, due to snowfall. Suddenly, after repeatedly asking the clerk to find us an alternate route, one opened up that would get us out of Salt Lake and give us an 8-hour layover in Vegas instead. I went from my worst airport moment ever to my greatest in the span of an hour. That clerk is my hero. Part 2, the Vegas to Boston flight ended up having us fly very near major storms in Texas and Oklahoma. The pilots let us know there's going to be turbulence. I somehow find it in me to fall asleep. I woke up with a massive thud from turbulence, and about a second later the plane begins to fall. I went weightless, and my seatbelt kept me strapped in. My wife let out a scream, so do others. I think, this is it, this is how it happens. And then, we regained control. The whole event lasted about 5 seconds. Turbulence backs off a few minutes later and we make it to Boston safe and sound. So, in conclusion, stranded in Salt Lake due to a blizzard. That's bad. Rerouted to Vegas with 8 hours to rip it up. That's good. Plane home to Boston starts falling from the sky. That's bad. Plane levels off and everyone hugs each other. Can I go now? I used to work in a fiberglass testing lab around buckets and buckets of the most flammable stuff you can imagine. Gasoline, ethanol, methanol, etc. There were open 5-gallon buckets of the stuff everywhere on the floor, and the walls were jammed with cabinets holding dozens of metal canisters of explosive liquids in storage. The job was dull. By the vent hood, we kept an old radio plugged into the hood sparkless outlet, and it was our sole entertainment. One day, a guy wheeled past in his chair and caught the radio cord. 5 of us watched the radio, still plugged in, bounce and teeter on the rim of a full 5-gallon bucket of xylene, then slowly pirouette away from the rim and hit the floor. A couple of millimeters to the left and we would have been vaporized. My supervisor, Jerry, one of the least flappable people ever, looked at us and said calmly, "We're gonna need to tape that to the wall." My girlfriend and I were driving to Vegas from San Francisco via Death Valley in a rental car. We were visiting the country. Anyway, we were 30 miles into Death Valley at around 6 p.m. when I realized we probably wouldn't have enough gas to make it to the next gas station, which was roughly 100 miles away. So after driving for another half hour or so, the blinking lights came on, indicating we were on reserve fuel. My girlfriend starts freaking out because our cell phones have no service, and there isn't anyone who we knew to call anyway. So we stopped at the deserted RV park in the middle of Death Valley to try and get some help, all while genuinely fearing running into a bunch of crazy hobos and getting robbed, kidnapped, or murdered. So anyway, the place is devoid of people, so we continue driving on reserve towards BC, Nevada. Eventually, the car grinds to a halt and we end up having to pull over to get help. We try flagging down cars for 45 minutes to no avail, until finally some truck that passes us suddenly pulls over and backs up to us. I explain our predicament to him and beg him to drive us to BC and back. By this time it was dark and the guy, a really friendly-looking Latino dude, senses that we're desperate and does us the favor. When we actually got to the gas station in BC, my girlfriend was so relieved that she started crying. I proceeded to buy a 2-gallon watering can and filled it up with gas. Later, the guy drives us all the way back. He did roughly 40 miles there and back to our car. At this point, I was so grateful that I offered him $200, to which he flat out refused and even offered to tail us to BC in case we ran out of gas again. We managed to get to Vegas in the end after being on the road for about 14 hours. But this incident really shook us, but also reminded us that there are truly good Samaritans out there. Jose, if you ever come across this post, I just want to let you know you're an awesome guy. I was on a Navy C-2, a propeller plane, flying back to the carrier with the mail. There are no windows in the cargo section of this plane. Suddenly, in mid-flight, I'm blinded with bright daylight and roaring wind all around me. In a split second, I'm in the crash position out of reflex. I open my eyes and see the sunlight on the floor with bits of newspaper and dust being thrown about by the wind. I hear the engines start to wind down and I feel like the seatbelt is the only thing keeping me from floating out of the seat as the plane starts to plummet. This lasts for a few seconds, but then the plane levels out and the aircrew guys are moving around me. One of them asks if I'm okay and if it hit me. It turns out an overhead escape hatch had come unlatched and landed in the row of seats in front of me. What was your best moment of, "Oh, I'm actually the bad guy here"? I used to work security at a college bar, and we would typically ask people to leave who were too intoxicated. One night I was posted up in the DJ booth because it was our normal shoulder-to-shoulder level of busy, and I watched this guy start stumbling and drinking his beer in a really weird way. I make my way over to him and tell him he has to leave because he's too drunk. He tries to tell me something, but I can't understand what he said because the music is so loud and he was slurring his words. We get outside and he tells me that he has cerebral palsy, which was pretty obvious after the fact. He was cool about it and I let him back in, but I don't think I've ever felt like a bigger jerk than that night. I have a buddy who has muscular dystrophy. Once, while in the liquor store, he had a bout of paralysis and collapsed. The reaction from everyone in there was along the lines of, "Oh great, another drunk," until he told them he has muscular dystrophy and physically can't get up. He said it was kind of funny watching them to all scramble to help him after that. You know when you get in an argument with someone and you come up with the perfect solution for the situation after the fact? About 2/3 of the trains I get on from Dublin to Cork, someone is sitting in a pre-booked seat that doesn't belong to them, whether it's mine or another person. And these people have all been cantankerous old geezers who have no desire whatsoever to shift themselves from a seat they didn't reserve. I had a man who was probably in his 80s stand up to his full height, a foot shorter than me, and bellow in my face that he didn't care that I booked the seat. He wasn't moving, while his shrew wife looked on with an air of proprietorial approval. It's pretty rotten. Finally, however, last month I boarded a train and someone was sitting in my seat with his partner, and I was just the right combination of tired and stressed to let him have it. I'd been waiting for months for my moment. I showed him my ticket, told them it was my seat, and insisted they move. I channeled Seinfeld for the first and hopefully last time in my life, and finally stormed off up the train when they continued to sit in my seat, full of righteous vindication that I was going to get my way. Finally, I was going to get one over on the train. No longer shall I back down to the whims of rude commuters. Now it is they who shall yield to the righteous powers of reservation. I went up to the staff cabin, asked for an administrator, told him the situation, and presented him with my ticket. This was met with, I see the problem here, sir. You've reserved a seat on the 6 o'clock train. This is the 4 o'clock train. I'd booked the ticket for 6 p.m. and become mixed up with the 6 in the 1600 or 4 p.m. train. I was mortified. I meekly took a seat near the opposite end of the train and didn't say a word to anyone else for the next 3 hours. In my quest to defeat the rude commuter, I had become what I hated most. The narrator, a mostly very diplomatic person, also feels like the 1 or 2 times he's decided to stand up for himself in his life, he has completely misjudged the situation and looked like a complete moron. Ah well. Pulled out of the gas station and this butthole was riding my bumper, honking his horn and waving and pointing. I pulled over, throwing my arms up ready for the altercation because I'd done nothing wrong. Turns out I drove off without closing my gas cap. Wasn't really such a big deal for how he was acting, but he was just trying to help. I apologized and thanked him. In high school, there was a kid who I unwittingly bullied. I actually thought he was a cool guy, and my friend group and I roughhoused a lot. Headlocks, finger circle game, dead legs, etc. I was just doing what I did with everyone I get along with. One day I came up behind him and did that thing where you kick someone's back leg into their front leg while they're walking, and they trip on their feet. He turned around with fear and anger in his eyes and yelled, "Why do you have to be such a jerk to me all the time?" My heart sank to my feet. I didn't realize that what I saw as friendly bonding play he found really intimidating. We talked it out and I spent the rest of my high school days being really nice to him. The weirdest part is that he was a pretty popular kid, not small by any means, and on a couple of different sports teams. Goes to show, anybody can feel bullied. I have a coworker who jokes around with nearly every coworker. But not me. A few years ago, I was tired and in a bad mood and trying to clock in. She was joking around with me and trying to keep me from clocking in. I thought she herself was just taking a really long time to clock in, but I lost my temper and I yelled, "Will you hurry up already?" She's never joked around with me or even been that friendly with me since. realizing that the reason my partner and I are always fighting is because I'm always picking fights. I'm still working on trying to fix this. I was at a restaurant doing a coworker dinner thing when I noticed the woman at the next table was staring me down, like barely blinking, full-blown eye contact. After a while, I started getting pretty agitated when my subtle social cues to stop staring at me went wholly ignored. After about 20 minutes of this, I'd had enough of this lady's unsolicited rudeness, and I did the whole "come at me, bro," arms in the air move, thinking that surely that would get my point across. I made a fairly big production of it. Only then did I realize that this lady was completely blind. When my sister was 13 and I was about 10, we were in a food court at the mall. A gentleman wearing a black suit and dark glasses was seated next to us. My sister looks at him, back to me, and says, "Hey, I think that guy's in the FBI or something." I was like, "He's blind," and the blind guy tried to suppress a smile. Went to a friend of a friend's house to chill out. He was a nice kid, but his house was crazy dirty. Dishes stacked to the ceiling, laundry strewn like carpet, old takeout food bags from a ton of places everywhere. Bags of garbage just lying in piles in the kitchen. The place stunk to high heaven, and I had trouble getting comfortable. Later, I commented on how dirty the place was to my friend. Turns out the guy's mum was terminally ill, and the guy had to help take care of her and his younger sibling, all while being a typical teenage boy. I felt bad for judging him. 2 weeks ago, I was dropping someone off at Union Station. As I was exiting the parking lot, there was one of those gate things where you insert your ticket. I inserted my ticket and the person behind me began honking. The gate was literally in the process of lifting up. I laid on the horn screaming, "Okay, I'm going!" But they kept honking anyway. I hit the accelerator and zoomed off, flicking them off for good measure in a very obvious way. I drive a convertible so I can put my hand right out the top. I was furious at them for honking for me to go when it was clear that I couldn't go any faster. I exited and turned left. A few moments later, that same car exited and also turned left and pulled up to me. They put down their window and I put mine down. Yes, everyone, you can have windows up while in a convertible. It reduces the effect of the wind. And I was like, "What the frick do you want, huh?" The lady in the other car said, "You left your coffee mug on the back of your car." She wasn't even mad. I was totally shocked. I looked behind me and sure enough, I'd set my tumbler on top of the trunk and she had been honking to try and let me know. I turned red, burst out laughing and told her I was so sorry for being such a jerk. I pulled over and got my cup. I couldn't believe what a butthole I'd been and how coolly she responded to the whole thing. This was my mum's moment. She was driving me and my brother home from the store when we were young, when she drove through an intersection screaming, "You've got a stop sign, lady," out the window at a person that she nearly hit. 10 seconds later, my mother realized that she was in fact the one who blew through a stop sign. All she did was, "Oh." Like any good kids, we still to this day yell, "You've got a stop sign, lady," at her. I was driving home one day and a person in the car next to mine waved at me. I went to wave back, and my hand instinctively flipped the other person off instead. Holy crap, you're like a reverse Mr. Bean. Mr. Mean. Used to think it was funny to quote Dodgeball and say, "You're adopted, your real parents don't even love you." I wish I could say that I learned my lesson the first time when I said this to someone who responded with, "Actually, I am adopted." I won that particular lottery twice. The narrator has been witness to not one, but 2 yo mama jokes, in which the recipient turned out to have lost said parental figure recently. It just feels like tempting fate to use any sort of parent-related joke these days. It was the moment I realized that I was in fact responsible for everything I did while mentally unstable. I spent years alienating everyone I knew by demanding that they forgive my crappy behavior because it wasn't me, it was my bipolar disorder. Everyone else was the bad guy because they just didn't understand my illness. I was the victim. One day it just kind of clicked. No matter what the cause, I was the one who was hurting the people around me. It wasn't on them to understand and forgive my endless parade of insanity. It was on me to get help and stop being so toxic to everyone around me. It was that epiphany that really helped me turn the corner. While I'd sought help before, it was always with the mindset that I had no responsibility and therefore no control over my illness. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Dang, this kid that we called Dino Kid because he always acted like a dinosaur at recess. We'd chase him around and poke fun all the time. Nothing big ever happened, but once we, as a class, were educated on ASD, everyone accepted the guy so quickly. The guy was so damn good at Guitar Hero. My fiancé is a 34-year-old man who sometimes, almost every day, acts like a T-Rex stalking me. It's adorable and I love it, but sometimes he gets really self-conscious because he's afraid I'm going to make fun of him for it. I've never in over 3 years together. I think he has dino PTSD. So, one time I was in a high school assembly and a bunch of kids in pajamas started walking into the auditorium. Pajamas were against the school's dress code. Me, thinking I was funny, yelled, "Hey, that's against the dress code!" Turns out it was the special ed class. I really felt like a jackass. I couldn't make myself small enough in that crowd. I thought I was saving someone from a bad marriage. I realized I was just convincing them to cheat on their husband. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. It wasn't me, but it was amazing to see. I was at Starbucks sitting outside along with a number of other people. A gym rat-looking guy starts drawing attention to himself and pointing at people saying, "Is that white Chevy over there your car?" After a couple of these outbursts, a guy sitting near me says, "Yeah, that's my car." The gym rat righteously said, "You're a royal jerk for parking in a handicapped spot. How can you be so selfish when someone who needs that spot might show up at any time? For all you know, he already drove through the parking lot, couldn't find the space, and he headed back home empty-handed. Blah, blah, blah." The car owner, "I'm sorry, I'm handicapped. I forgot to hang the tag when I left the car." The gym rat, "Oh, really?" At this point, the car owner, who'd been sitting down and showed no signs of handicap, stands up. The guy is basically bent in half, like his spine is fused in a 90-degree angle. He looked perfectly normal sitting down. Okay, I'll go to the car and hang the tag." The gym rat, upon seeing him stand, "Sorry, you don't have to do that." The car owner slowly and uncomfortably walks the 40 feet to his car, opens the door, fumbles to hang the tag, and then ambles his way back to the seat, rigidly bent the entire time. When I was in grade school, I had a serious problem keeping my mouth shut. Basically, if a thought popped into my head, I was freaking saying it. The teachers didn't exactly appreciate the constant blurting out, but one time I really crossed the line because I made fun of a perfectly sweet girl just because her mum smoked. F you, former self. I was already a problem child, and while I wasn't technically expelled, I did have to leave and go to a different school. So yeah, basically expelled, but off the record. What's worse is that it took about 2 years of sulking for me to finally realize that I had it coming. Every bit of it. Gosh, I can't believe how much of a craphead I was. I was a freshman in high school. I don't know why it occurred to me, but I figured that if you rubbed the little cage that held your books under the desk the right way, it would resonate and make this loud humming sound. I'd sit there and wait for the teacher to turn her back and start. She'd turn around and look at the air conditioner vent that was right above me. Of course, when she did, I would stop. She'd look bewildered and then turn back around. Of course, I would start up again. Being the quiet kid, no one in the class suspected me. It was hilarious. Until they closed the classroom down for a couple of days because they had concerns about the air conditioners malfunctioning. When I was 10 or so, a friend of mine got appendicitis, so the teacher asked us to write letters of support to her. Little me thought I could troll her in the same way I could do in the internet, which isn't even justified online, by the way. So I wrote an entire letter joking about her condition, wishing it got worse, and saying in the end that it's all a joke and I wish she got well. The teacher came to class mad and disappointed, and proceeded to read my letter without saying my name. I instantly knew I'd messed up, and I never did it again. Never did it again? How often do your friends get appendicitis? Actually, last year I got appendicitis and my friends didn't write prank letters. Oh no. They visited me at the hospital and told me the most effed up jokes so that when I laughed, my abdominals hurt like a B word after the surgery. Let's just say I got what I deserved. I would say that this seems like a banter thing that the teacher might have misinterpreted, but then again, not many 10-year-olds can pull off that level of dark humor. I know that it's the kind of thing I'd write to certain friends if they were in hospital. I was the assistant manager of a fast food place in college. A bunch of punk rocker-looking guys my age came in to eat, around the same time as some soccer mums with little kids. One of the punk rock kids was pretty intimidating, easily a foot taller than me and built like an athlete. They were all perfectly nice when they ordered their food, but once they got their cups to fill up their drinks, the big guy started screaming and cursing at the top of his lungs, "Mother fricking pig fricker son of a B-word!" The mums all looked horrified. I'm normally quite averse to conflict, so I was quite proud of myself when I marched around the counter and got right up in this big dude's face. I looked him straight in the eye and told him that if he had a problem acting like a human being, he needed to get out of my restaurant. He looked back at me and almost started crying. He whispered, "I'm sorry," and turned around and walked away. He looked absolutely destroyed, and his friends followed him trying to console him. Either that guy legitimately had Tourette's, or the whole group of them was pulling a prank and were absolutely the best actors I've ever seen. Oh gosh, I still feel bad whenever I think about this. So about a year ago, I was on a long international plane flight. I always book the aisle seat because I have a GI disorder that means I sometimes have to get to the bathroom with very little notice. So being trapped in the middle or window seat is suboptimal. I get all seated for my flight, which is the second leg of probably 12 or more hours of travel, and I'm so exhausted I start to nod off before boarding is even finished. I'm awakened by a man politely asking if he can have my seat. Groggily, I explain that no, sorry, I set this up this way because of an illness I have, and I get up so that he can have the window seat. It was a small flight, so no middle seat at least. The nerve of some people, right? If you wanted the aisle seat, why didn't you just choose it beforehand, random dude? The world doesn't revolve around you. Well, about 3 hours into my flight, I woke up again, feeling slightly more human, and I end up having a conversation with my roommate. And within about 5 minutes, I discovered that no, he wasn't asking to switch seats, he was telling me that I was in his seat. Apparently, the airline had switched who was seated where so that he could be closer to his wife and daughter, who was sitting across the aisle. I hadn't looked at my electric boarding pass since going through security, so I didn't notice the change. I apologized profusely and offered to switch immediately, but the poor guy just said it was okay and declined. Ugh. I should probably mention that I'm a short, baby-faced girl, which probably made it worse as this middle-aged guy clearly had no idea what to do about a small, early 20-something girl who looks more like a 12-year-old than anything, telling him he couldn't have his assigned seat. Honestly, that dad might have secretly loved having some personal time. Yep, because of that inconsiderate chick in the aisle seat, I had to do nothing but watch a movie, read a book, and nap for the whole 12-hour flight. Sorry, honey. I've flown a lot with our daughter, sometimes alone and sometimes with my wife. That's not a lot of difference in my opinion, as the main difficulty is just the endless activity and interruptions. It's not difficult as much as relentless. If the kid is in between the parents, neither of them gets much rest. Now, if the poor mom was stuck with 2 kids, then you truly are a monster. In middle school, I pulled some really creepy stuff on a guy I liked, as in an insane amount of physical stalking. I memorized his schedule only through following him everywhere, and I always appeared in the same place he was. I took one of his belongings that he forgot somewhere and took an assignment of his that was posted on the class corkboard because I just wanted his stuff. At the time, it didn't even occur to me that what I was doing was messed up. All I thought about was, how can I be around this person without having to interact with him? It's been over half a decade since then. If I did any of the crap I did as an adult, I would have been arrested with at least a few restraining orders. My friends told me it was messed up, but I refused to listen. I probably did some serious, permanent mental damage to the poor kid. I hope he's managed to recover, and I hope he never has to worry about anything like this again. He deserves the relief. My best friend's younger sister had a weird headband on one day. We were in high school at the time, so she was in middle school. She and my friend didn't really get along, and she was kind of mean to me too, so I saw an opportunity to tease her and said, "Nice headband." Turns out she had cosmetic surgery of some kind to make her ears stick out less, and the headband was there to cover her surgical wounds. I sure felt like a butthole. This actually happened yesterday. It's not that bad of a thing, but I was driving on a road and I saw someone on a side street pull out onto my road right in front of a girl that was trying to cross the street. Immediately, I got teed off that this D-bag almost hit a girl just to be fast. So I followed him for about 30 seconds until he parked, so I drove right up next to him and said, "Hey, butthole, you almost killed that girl back there. What the frick were you thinking?" He looked confused and just said, "Dude, she waved me ahead and let me go. What the frick are you talking about?" Immediately, I started to apologize, telling him that it looked bad from where I was, but yeah, I went from hero to zero real quick. I broke up with a close friend and made up with them recently. I was being emotional and lashed out, questioning their friendship because they wouldn't drop everything they were doing for me. I know now that I'm wrong. My friend has always been there for me, and I still feel bad even though I apologized. I'm a bad friend. Got into a fist fight. We were equally sized and matched, but I came out on top. For those of you who've ever been in a fist fight, you know that line you're not supposed to cross? You know, when the fight should be over, but you throw another punch anyway? I crossed that line. I threw several more punches. I wasn't proud afterwards. I'm not entirely sure this fits, but I'll put it down anyway. I used to be insanely shy and thought everyone hated me for no reason because they wouldn't talk to me. Turns out I was intimidating because I never wanted to talk and was too scared to be around them, so they eventually gave up. Since then, I've been trying to make an effort to be nice and say hi to everyone, but I'm still struggling a bit. In first grade, I was making fun of a short boy without realizing I was hurting his feelings. It got to the point where I'd upset him so much he buried his tiny first-grade fist right in my stomach. I was left lying on the playground trying to catch my breath. Sort of an eye-opener then and there to treat people the way I wanted to be treated. Good on him for jumping to make sure he actually could get you in the stomach. My dog was barking for no reason and wouldn't stop after I yelled at him 3 times. I turned around and he's at the door looking at me with his derpy face while the neighbor's dog continues to bark. Sorry, bud. A guy kept bumping into me in line at a theme park. I kindly asked him twice to back up a bit and give me some room. The third time I turned right around and raised my voice a little and started to show some irritation. This guy was clearly on the spectrum. Parents and family shuffled him back a few steps and apologized to me. I almost cried from embarrassment. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.